education program to meet their requirements for this. So right now, in talking with Kyle and others, you know, it certainly does not appear as though making the August deadline, or the August ballot is realistic. I'm not quite sure just what the timing is, what the city of Spokane, and when they may be able to take this forward. There are other options. There's November of 24, there's February of 25, or even later into 25. This funding mechanism will expire at the end of 2025. So that's where we are at this point. My recommendation, my desire would be to try to get this on the ballot in 24, but honestly, I don't know if that's realistic, depending on the participation of our municipalities. I just don't think that it's not realistic for this program to be viable if neither one of our significant municipalities participate. You know, I will remind everyone, you know, that this is a monitoring program for our drinking water system that the municipalities of Spokane and the city of Spokane Valley all rely upon. And this monitoring system provides an early warning and early detection. We provided a presentation earlier to this board on the trends analysis, and we're sharing that information with the community as well. We believe it has value to the community, but again, it's a decision that's really in the hands of our elected officials and eventually our voters. So I'd like to take that forward. So if there are any questions.
Kyle.
Thank you. Rob covered it quite well there. I wanted to add on that I would say we've got some pretty strong interest from the city of Spokane, and that, as we mentioned, the municipalities are not only greatly benefit from this, but they really will carry the voter base that we need in order to pass this. The rural unincorporated isn't likely to have majority support, so you know, we need a strong partner in moving forward on this. And I get a lot of indication from the city of Spokane that when the timing works and it's not competing with Parks or Justice, and their administration has a minute to, you know, get a little time under their legs, that they would be very interested in moving forward with us. They really understand the communication side, and you know, if we swap one city for the other in this, the program is still very viable. We can continue our work, and we can continue to, both on the monitoring side, the educational side. The Valley understands that value they get from us with regards to the educational components of their stormwater permit. They understand that they have a fiduciary responsibility if they want to keep a part of that. And we are having preliminary discussions about that. But I think as long as we can work together, then we will we'll be just fine as far as you know, if we have a partner, that'll really set our timing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, my thought is the city of Spokane is exploring several different measures for August of their own. So I'm thinking I would like to continue exploring a partnership with them. It might be the timing for this year is just not the right timing. But is that what your thought is, Kyle, after speaking with the city?
Yeah, that's exactly the case. Is there's a lot of interest. The timing is the big question. And I want to highlight that, you know, as we have through 2025 to get this right and make a good swing and a compelling, you know, case to educate the community. And that if we are able to, but that going beyond 2025, this is going to be at that point a new charge. as opposed to an extension of an existing charge that has been on, the tax rolls for 40 years. And, for the city, it's been on, it's been off. I doubt there's much memory of that, but we would not recommend delaying beyond November of 2025.
Randy.
Commissioners, I just also want to also remind you, you also have a juvenile, just 1/10% that expires, December 31st of 2025 as well. So you will want to consider that as far as competing issues, as you go, and we can talk more about that in my presentation later today.
One, I think if we delay till spring of next year, we're competing with the school districts. Then, because the school districts all go in February, so, and I'm thinking they're coming back with their bonds at that point in time, so. So there's never a good time.
Does this have to be on, I forgot, does it have to be on a certain ballot?
Doesn't have to be on. the
It's not
certain
just primary or general, it could be,
ballot. Correct.
okay.
It can go on any ballot.
Okay.
As I understand.
Well, I'll just give you a brief update of kind of where we're at with regard to the West Plains. I did form a leadership group about 2 months ago. We've been meeting every other week, talking about both the APA and also a PFAS solution. I think we are not in a position to where we'd be able to go out to a vote this year. There are still a number of questions that need to be answered. And so I think, pushing this until 2025 would probably fit with regard to the West Plains, regardless of what the rest of the region does. And there's a possibility we might not need it at all if a couple other things come to fruition. So that's kind of where we're at.
Rob, one of the questions, so primarily what happens with these funds is the monitoring and education.
Correct.
And is it a requirement to do? I mean, do we have an educational requirement from anybody? I mean, I guess.
Well, we have an educational requirement within our stormwater program. And then we also provide community education and outreach in support of our wastewater NPDES permit as well.
So it's that permit that requires
Yeah,
community outreach and education.
correct.
Okay.
But to be very clear, Spokane County enjoys a very robust education program because of the APA.
Right.
And it's a program that, quite frankly, is to a lot of other programs in the state, our education program is the envy of many.
Well, and with the monitoring, the thing that's so important about that is with all the different water districts out in the county. Providing that monitoring, I'm
Correct.
assuming the water districts rely on that as well.
They appreciate that, and indeed, there are some of the less sophisticated, the smaller water districts. We've actually been assisting them in collecting samples, helping with their compliance programs. So, yes, we've worked in concert with them. We sample some of their wells. So, yeah, we've been serving the Burbank community as well. But it is a, it's not a requirement. So the APA was a tool to implement the water quality management program. That was the vision of leaders decades ago. And so these were add-on activities.
Kylan, I see you raise your hand.
Yeah, I'd just like to add on a little bit more on the water quality monitoring. One of the things that is so important about that is that it's a long range trend. Things don't change quickly with regards to water quality. It takes 20 years to really see the effects of, say, our sewering program And we're starting to see some, as we indicated earlier, some changes in our drinking water with regards to fluorides that we absolutely, now, is it Spokane County's responsibility? Do we need to be funding it? We can have those kind of debates and arguments about this, but the point being is, I think we would be very cautious to discontinue that water quality monitoring since we do have such a long trend line of data. We'd be wanting to find a solution for that, whether that's a shared financial responsibility, whether that is, again, what we get this APA off the ground for, or another solution. Just being good stewards of what we all ingest every day. And for better or for worse, the county has owned that for 40 years.
I'd like to add to that, and I'll just speak as a geologist, as a hydrogeologist. It's not very often that a community has an aquifer that they can monitor and keep an eye on over a long period of time and have the resources and the ability to do that. And we've been able to do that. And as Kyle's mentioned, we've been able to identify areas of improvement over the last 40 years of having these monitoring programs. But we've also been able to identify areas of ongoing threat. And so to be able to identify these areas as threats before they become actual problems, where we have water quality numbers being exceeded and having outright contaminated aquifers, I think there's value in being able to see those trends up front. And this APA funding is allowing us to do that in our regional aquifer.
No, it's an important program for sure. The success of the program will be that much more successful if we have all jurisdictions participating. I think it's pretty clear right now the Valley is not going to, although they've expressed some potential interest in contributing some of their stormwater dollars. I believe Kyle's had this conversation with them towards the education side of the equation, but I think my suspicions are that if it's primarily unincorporated based and doesn't include the two largest cities, our success will be challenged.
Is the city of Spokane Valley currently in the area? Oh, okay,
Yes.
so that would be a new change.
The city of Spokane is not.
Correct.
Yes, yep,
Right.
yes. So they would be essentially opting out this go around.
The Valley has been in it twice or both times.
Right.
The city of Spokane was in the first one, not the second one. And now it's appearing they might be interested in flip-flopping for the third round here, but we'll see. Winds change a lot in a year. We'll see, but we definitely would recommend basing our timing on when we have a partner.
And as you said, Madam Chair, I think there are conversations evolving over the school bonds and other things and other measures. So we just need to stay in touch, I think, and check in every time we don't want to miss a deadline in our conversations as we go forward. So, I mean, I would recommend that we check in again in a couple months as we get close to the deadline for November, just to see where our conversations are with the city, what the schools are thinking of doing next year, so that we can make our plans.
Because the current deadline is mid-May. I think it's gonna finally be the current deadline for the August ballot.
Yeah. It would be,
Check in again.
so it'd be July.
Commissioners, the deadline for the November would be August, that election day.
Election, yeah. But for the primary, it's
It's filing, the
Okay.
filing.
so, which is second week in May this year,
This year it is the second week of May. Yes, it's moved up a week.
so. So yeah, and then it's each election thereafter for the next one, so for the most part, December, I guess, for February. But, okay, well. Thank you, I mean, it's one of those,
Thank you.
until we know what the city of Spokane is gonna choose to do, so we'll add that to the list.
I would also just for information, probably close to 15% or more of the education programs that we provide go to City of Spokane schools. And then on top of that, the Spokane School District conducts a number of meetings at our facility. We've been very open with them about providing training facilities for the nursing staff and educational objectives. So we've been supportive of the City of Spokane and Spokane Public Schools. As I said before, we don't like to say no.
Right.
To any.
No.
Their interest.
I appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Thanks, Kyle. Okay, so then that's gonna take us next to Justin Johnson. To talk about the opioid settlement funding update.
Yes, good morning, commissioners. Wanted to give an update for our discussion a couple weeks ago where we outlined some of the proposed projects. Feedback from the board was more clear delineation of how those funds would be utilized within the existing anticipated amounts as well as the known amounts that we received. So Gina, can you pull the now it's a little bit hard, I believe, to see here. But this is all,
Think?
yes.
Can't read that. Seriously?
But if you really try to see this, and I'll go through this, it's been provided for you to review.
The packet.
Yes.
Okay.
It's in the packet for review. Unfortunately, how it's laid out over the series was hard to do. But I do believe in working this and going back and forth with Scott, we did outline some key areas that should be able to more clearly, I said, delineate how those funds will be utilized within the projected amounts. So on the bottom there, you'll see the proposed projects that we discussed and the board had given a nod to at least look at these key areas of implementation. And then also what our anticipated or projected amounts are for a one-time disbursement, primarily for facility and or building renovation and enhancement, and then ongoing funding directed to the support of those services from on an annual basis moving forward. Those would be more operational and not directed towards a facility, a capital investment. So that's the delineation to the one-time and ongoing. If you look at the spreadsheet that Heather provided, this is the most up-to-date one we've got. You'll see in black, it says cumulative. That's the anticipated amount on an annual basis that we will receive. In the red, you'll see the cumulative with proposed projects. That's how much would be available after implementing the funds for either the one-time and ongoing beginning in 2024. So that's the remaining amount. Recognizing that from year to year, it may not be directly reflective of actuals, just what would be proposed in terms of what we would be liable to be paying for those capital investments and ongoing funding. What we have found is oftentimes the operational funding comes in a lot lower. And of course, the capital investment is dependent upon where the board wants to go and the federal earmark funding that we may or may not receive, and then additional mental sales tax to support the facility expansion. So that's the breakdown. As you can see, there remains relatively with proposed amounts that we believe we receive. Amounts for either admin costs, which were not included, and legal costs, which were not included. Those have yet to be determined on what will be the actual time commitment or what has already been incurred. Don't believe substantial because our side of a house on the CST, we've been funding it with time, my time and staff time out of our existing contracts. We haven't actually put that towards the opiate dollars at this time. But I know that legal has also put in some time that still needs to be accounted for, as well as Dale's time, as well as Senior Director Sparber and his team as well, and then Heather and her team. So, questions?
Yeah, so in your treatment services and the long-term housing, you've got no ongoing dollars allocated. Where do you think those dollars are going to come from?
Great question.
Thank you.
Yes, that is the project we discussed, which would be similar to what Maddie's Place is hoping to achieve, is to build out long-term housing supports for the women who are taking care of children as part of the program with NAS,
Okay,
be able to transition and stay. They are, part of this was the idea that if we were to give them a one-time disbursement, they would find matching funding from private donation and or other Department of Commerce investment. And it sounds like they are already on track to get that funding.
okay, all right, thank you.
Because of the housing portion, there's not really a treatment component as a part of that.
And to follow up on Commissioner French's comment, so the treatment services, the sobering services is, there's a funding source to build Medicaid for that, or?
Yes.
Okay.
And existing dollars that the ASR already has that needs to.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we have approximately $600,000 to $700,000 of SABG funding that has not been utilized on an annual basis. When the state took back a lot of the dollars for the Medicaid side, we were paying room and board for everyone in substance use, Medicaid and non-Medicaid. That was removed and they're paying that. So now we can utilize these dollars for the purposes of direct treatment. So all sobering services would be covered by us.
And the other thing Justin and I talked about in the 23-hour crisis relief, the first line there, we've placed 200,000 on ongoing. And tell me if I misstate this, Justin. A lot of those anticipated users would be covered under funding sources that come through Justin's team today. But this would be an amount for those that would not be eligible. We've just placed a dollar amount in here. It's a potential to be able to cover it in case there are some, it's over the poverty, what was the 220% of
FBI, yeah.
yeah. So that's just, we wanted to be conservative on there to show there may be some dollars, the vast majority we anticipate would be covered under existing funding sources.
Yeah, and that would be predominantly the 22-hour crisis relief portion. The sobering portion, again, is totally covered by our house for both of those investment areas. We recognize that there's quite a bit of individuals with private insurance that probably don't currently contract with that. And that's a demographic that does utilize the service, but would not be, if they'd have to pay out of pocket. We want to remove that barrier.
So basically, we have the funding for the treatment services. The challenge is we need to build the facility because that doesn't exist today. And that's where the capital dollars that we're asking through a federal earmark as well as these dollars.
Correct.
Okay.
So I guess that's my question is, so what do we think the actual cost to expand capital cost is, the total?
I mean, it could be up to 15 million. We've just done some very wide range of estimates based on the square footage, based on the size of the facility, based on cost per square footage of similar sizes. And I think we penciled around 12, but we just don't know what the bidding climate is, or even what the design would look like, because we've started those efforts. It's a really wide range. 12 to 15 million is probably a safe area.
Okay, so but we're only allocating 5 here and asking for.
5 from the feds, and I think I believe
It's
we
down
want
from
to.
5.
Oh, is it?
Jeff McMorris, are you on to know what our ask is? Oh, there he is.
I was talking with Tessa, so I don't know what your question may be.
So the question is, what's the final number that we're asking the feds for? Was it 5 or was it down to 3?
The SRSC expansion ended up at 4 per Desmond's advice.
5 was.
5 is the most we can ask on any given project. In the House, it's actually the most. In the Senate, it's kind of accepted most. And then the West Plains one is 5, but the SRSC is 4.
So would we consider, we want to increase the allocation from these settlement funds? Just a thought. And what would that do to the model for, financial?
And we'll, of course, know more once we embark on a design process. We'll have an idea of what the rough order of magnitude will be. Right now, it's just simply a estimated square footage times estimated square footage cost. We just don't know any more than that.
So at this point, we're sitting anywhere between 4 and 6 million short of hitting the target.
Of a target of a estimated target. I mean, I
Yeah.
think the.
Well, that's all right. I just
Yeah.
want to quantify it.
I
Well,
think
the-
you had talked with Gil to get some ideas of the dollars per square footage, and then I think we had also looked at King County's kind of size and then used kind of some of those numbers. I might be high on my 15 million.
We were talking, Justin and I were talking 10 to 12.
Okay.
Gil talked with the firm that did the current SRSC. And to build to that same spec, which would be the same healthcare level requirements, it's coming in at $625 a square foot. And then Kyle did a rough estimate of building size for us. Which, I mean, it seems crazy expensive to me, but that's what they said. And then purchasing the property is expected to be about 1.2 million. We'll have to buy it from the Public Works Department.
Right.
So those are the two big cost drivers.
Then whether we'll be able to utilize the existing building on there and expand it, or whether we'd have to tear it down and build a new one, all those things gonna inform on cost. So
That's based
Yeah.
on the remodel.
we're probably, if we've dropped our ask from 5 to 4, we're likely short. We're gonna either have the commissioners dedicate some more opioid dollars or find some other partners, whether it's state or other jurisdictions to be part of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should talk to the city and I don't think they've allocated everything yet, so.
And Justin's had many conversations with them, and to date, there hasn't been any, I don't think there's been any financial commitment made other than support, verbal support for it. So if you look at this, if you look at the far right side of your spreadsheet here, which shows by the end of the 38 timeframe, what we know today is we are expected to receive $17 million. So if all these investments were approved by the commissioners, we'd still have 4.6 left. Now, if we look up above, there's a number of open no amounts in a number of the settlements, because we don't know. We know we're going to get payments. We just don't know what the payments are. So that 17 million is going to go up. We just don't know by how much. It's the odd thing. We've talked about it before. Some of the settlements have given us the projections through the end of the time. Some of them have only given us the year one, or as they pay. But we could feel fairly confident that the numbers are going to be higher than 17 million. You just can't tell you if it's going to be 25 million, 20 million. Don't know.
When will we know?
Right now, based on what their history has been in the year that they received the funds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fine.
So I think from that standpoint, no, not.
Well, that's real clear. I appreciate that.
Well, I guess maybe the best way to look at it right now is with the unknowns. The knowns are 17 million. So how comfortable is our commissioners admitting, the entirety of that? There's another 4.6 left. That 4.6 would likely be enough to close any estimated delta on the facility. And again, continue to seek for other assistance, other support for this as well.
I mean, I think that as we get our numbers more clear, then going to the state next year, as well as talking to the city, I think we can it's good to know that we could close the gap. Cause I wouldn't want us to commit to a project that we are uncertain about, but it looks like there are opportunities to close that gap.
So is the city looking at a similar kind of funding structure in terms of what they anticipate receiving? And so they're still going through their process of trying to figure out what they want to spend the money on. But it's similar to in scale to what we're looking at.
Rough estimate, Commissioner, they're probably in the 60 to 70% of our figures. We're like if I remember right, we're like a 5.8% of the grand scheme, and they're like a 3 point something. We're like a 5.5, like a 3 something. So probably 2/3 of the scale. Thereabouts. But still significant.
And then the valley got like nothing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and that was just from one of them. They're gonna get more than that, but it will be on a much different magnitude than ours. So yeah, I do think with the dollars in there that we expect to receive, while they ask us to earmark 5 million towards it, once we get to a point of you all saying, let's go with this, then we would begin to bring some consultants on to help us with delineating and a design on it. And then ultimately get into more of an idea of what it would cost us. I anticipate this will be another great candidate for an alternative delivery going through the project review committee. So with the building that it is, we've got a track record now going with having projects approved through that group, and I think it's given us some good value for it as well. So we'd have some ideas well before we got to any large term commitments.
Is it fair to say that we would be interested in going down this path and that we want to try and identify other sources of funding to help meet the goal, but we're committed to going down the path, or are we still not sure that this is the path we want to go down?
I would say from the team standpoint, we feel very confident this is the path that we believe we need to go down to. And then identify the remaining gap funds that are needed. And mental health sales tax is another area that we could use. So I should make sure I state that.
So I guess thank you. So if this is a path that we collectively think we want to go down, then what we need to do is provide greater clarity around the obstacles and opportunities, and we only know that by investing money to try and get experts on board to tell us what does the nut look like that we have to crack. So why would we not just go ahead and at least make that decision and start moving in that direction, get some consultants on board to help solidify what the number is so that we at least know, if it's a $12 to $16 million idea and it's closer to a $10 million idea, that's a big delta. And the only thing that will really clarify that is investment to get answers. So I guess I'm wondering, why don't we just go ahead and make that commitment?
I agree with you, Commissioner. I think that is what would be necessary. We have to spend some money to get to a point of having some.
If you have already come to that conclusion, then I apologize for trying to catch up, but
No, that's why I asked the question as to how much is this really gonna cost us?
Yeah.
So we could get to this.
it's that, yeah.
Yep.
So
Well, I'd be in favor of moving forward.
I would be too, and it would be coming out of these dollars.
Yeah.
Because it's for that purpose, so. And I feel like we have to at least go down that piece of it to understand to really understand the feasibility of it.
Well, and it's similar to what we did with the stabilization facility. I mean, at some point you make a commitment of faith and then just follow through. So seems like this would be the same kind of an approach.
I agree.
Okay, so we need a motion there, sir.
I
Oh,
think
no.
we do, because it would
You
be
think we're okay?
getting consultants on board and those contracts would come back before us.
Okay.
What I would anticipate we'll do is we'll get a resolution together to identify these commitments for the commissioners. So once you've approved those, then we'll start going out and getting consultants on board, bringing those contracts back for you to approve. But the resolution will be the trigger to say, yep, you want to invest in these projects, and then we'll get off and running. I mean, there's gonna be some RFPs, I apologize.
No, because I do think we do need to get the resolution, so as we go to the federal government
Yes.
funding, they know we're committed to getting. We have the commitment there that if they provide the funds, we're gonna continue on with this. But it's like trying to figure out what the delta is, because I think you're saying that we have enough in future revenue coming in to cover the delta.
With the federal dollars if they do it, yes. Yep, I believe we do.
But we'd rather have other partners come in, like the city.
So that we could use these other dollars for other.
Yep.
Community priorities.
Yes.
Is it too early to go ahead and start to socialize this in DC next week when we're back there?
The senators already have we put in Senator Murray's last
Okay.
week, it was again last week before.
Okay.
It was already there. John Colton has had preliminary conversations. I don't know if the senators themselves are on board yet, but their staff should.
Okay.
So definitely worth having those discussions.
I'm good.
The two middle projects, Justin, I believe, would be RFP based. That's correct. And Justin's team is in a position of being ready for those as well, once we get a resolution together. So if you're all supportive of it, we'll have a resolution on your agenda for the week of April 22nd.
We get back.
Yep, once you get back.
No, that'd be great, and then we can let the sheriff's department know that we're moving forward so they can. I don't know if they need to hire the person.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, appreciate it. Randy and team,
Good.
good morning.
We have a couple of items for you today. We are going to start off with the sales tax report. This, just a reminder, is the sales tax we received in March, which would be based upon January activity. Jason's gonna take that for us.
All right. We changed the format a little bit to hopefully make it a little bit more readable and provide you some information a little more clearly and shorten the presentation up by a couple minutes. Sales tax for March came in at about 5.5 million, which was a little bit lower than we budgeted by about 0.4%. So if you look at the left side, sales tax actuals versus budget, that grid. The right side is sales tax actuals versus the prior year. So we're 0.2% lower for the month, but 1.3% higher year to date. So January to March collections year to date, 1.3% higher than we were last year. And in the middle section, you can just see the grid. The dashed line is our projection. The light blue line being 23 collections and the dark blue line being 24 collections so far this year. And if you scroll down a little bit. This one we added is new. It's the year over year change in sales tax growth rate. As you see on the left hand, the left part of the slide, all blue, all pretty high columns, because we did really, really well, 23 over 22. On the right hand side, you see a little more red. For the past 12 months, 7 of the 12 months year over year have had a negative growth rate. So this slide, you can see the trend is definitely going down. So it's a pretty looking slide, but the information doesn't so good. Next slide. And similar to you've seen before, this is just where the sales tax money is being generated from. 58% of it, sales that have been delivered into Spokane County. The red, 25% for the city, 12% for Valley and the other areas. And then Commissioner Kearns had asked a question about on the other jurisdictions, whether their growth is allocated the same percentage historically. We're still working on that, so hopefully I can get that by the next presentation. Guys, and if you scroll down a little bit, towards the bottom. Again, just a reminder, so Washington sales tax is destination based. So wherever the merchandise is being delivered. So sales tax is just on merchandise and in a couple small cases on services. So if the sales made in the city, we get 15 cents out of a dollar. If it's made in the county, we get the entire dollar. Next slide. And this slide will kind of zip through a little bit because it's going to be on our second half of the presentation, but it just lists the sales tax types, what comprises the 8.9% of sales tax on a purchase, where it goes. Again, you see like the big part of it, 6.5% goes to the state. 1%, which is the 2.5% go to the either city or the county, and then all the different areas. And it has the expiration dates towards the bottom as well, different sales tax, but Randy's gonna be covering that, so hopefully slide right past that one and go to the next slide. Okay, so the top three, no big change, the top three economic sectors are retail, trade, construction, and accommodation and food sectors. There's a bunch of other sectors that comprise the other sectors, but they're all really small amounts, nothing really significant. If you scroll down a little bit, part that is definitely not looking so hot, retail trade is only up 1.5% year over year, and that's our largest revenue generating sector. And again, this is, counting for, inflation. Sales are definitely dropping. Construction is down 18%. And again, this is year over year. We took out the monthly reporting just because to try to smooth it out a little bit in case there's any spikes in someone's reporting. They report early or they report late. But construction is down year over year, 18%. The next sector, and this is the first time this has happened in a long time, accommodation and food services is down year over year. That has been up for a really, really long time. So it's down only 4%, but the fact that it's down is certainly.
COVID money is gone.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, just a quick question on so is it 2000? I'm trying to read the colors on the graph.
Oh, sorry.
Is it 2022 that you have on there?
2022 is the gray. I'll make the colors a little more pronounced on the next one, sorry.
And then where is 2024? Because I only see
It is
two
the
lines.
dot.
2024 is
It's
just
the
the dot
dot.
because.
Right, that's why I was like
Sorry about that.
confused. Okay, I was like, are you projecting out 2024? Okay, got it.
No, just the dot, sorry.
It just looks black to me, so.
March is always a little bit rough because there's no line, so
Got
it's
it.
just that 1 month.
Just the
for
dot.
January.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, it's only one
only one
data
month.
point. It's only one data point for the whole year.
Yes, exactly.
I'm
But
looking on the bright side.
Yes. yes, it's very optimistic. I wish I
Okay.
shared that optimism.
Okay. Right.
So, as we look at potential construction for this year, I'm not aware, and maybe there's some activity going on in the valley that I'm not aware of. But I'm not aware of any real school projects that are underway or out for bid or anything. I think all the bond projects have been completed. And there's no other retail expansion going on and stuff. So the only thing that would be going on is either small commercial projects or housing, and even housing is challenging. I know that I have 4 projects that should be starting construction in the West Plains this year. But that will probably be middle to the latter part of the summer, so we're not gonna see a lot of benefit from that in this year. We will next year, but not for this year. So what we're seeing is pretty much a projection of kind of what we will see for the rest of this year then. Because there's really nothing on the horizon.
And I would say that would correspond with all the reading that Jason does. Also, they're saying 25 is gonna be about like, or excuse me, 24 and 5 will be about like 23 was. And we really won't come back to normals until about at 26. And out. So they're saying, yeah, these next 2 years are gonna be a lower growth rate. Or flat, but lower growth rate is what they're saying.
Right.
And going back to normal starting at 26.
And then to Commissioner Walter's point, it is just one data point, just because historically we've always reported on collection. I could do a 12-month look back if you wanted like a 12-month rolling average or a 12-month look back for all these data points. I could do that. But it's probably gonna look like that. I'll be honest.
No, but that makes a lot of sense. Those school projects, you know, were huge.
School projects are
the
the big
last
sales
2
tax
years.
generator.
Yeah.
So so one of the conversations going on in Seattle, King County is that there's a number of office building projects that started 2 years ago. And now that COVID and everything else has hit, Amazon's moving out of Seattle and you got a lot of office space that's gonna be coming on and there's no tenants to be had. And so they're talking about a significant downshift in real estate appraised values that's going to negatively impact the county in terms of its revenue and stuff. So is like, I think I've mentioned before, as I talk to local realtors, they say that while the advertised vacancy rate in the city of Spokane downtown core is somewhere around 15 to 20%, the real vacancy rate is closer to 40%. And as leases get renewed and they get downsized and the valuations get dropped, we have that ahead of us too. So you not only have the drop in sales tax, but you also have the potential for a drop in real estate values. Maybe not as bad here as it is in Seattle, but it certainly has the potential of having an impact.
And to that point, Commissioner French, as those values go down, it doesn't decrease the amount of property taxes we collect, but it shifts the
Shifts it.
burden
Yeah,
to where those property taxes are collected.
yeah. Yeah, who?
And just as a reminder for the commissioners, a lot of these things are why you all made the decision to budget at only a 2% growth rate, 2% rate for 2024. Even though historically we've been closer to 4% year over year, still some strong headwinds against us.
Well, and despite the strong employment numbers that came out last week, the pocketbook for workers has not been impacted in a positive fashion. The cost of goods, services are not only high, but a couple of the communities over the other side of the state are now requiring minimum wage for fast food restaurants, $20.
California.
That's California, it's down. So they're, you know, the SeaTac and some of the other communities are already at the $20 number for a burger.
And the other thing that is impacting that also, commissioners, is credit card debt is at an all-time high right now.
Yeah.
People had the money during COVID, they kept spending, and now they've been putting it on credit cards. So that is also hampering the ability for people to spend as we go.
Okay, next slide. So just a closer look, and then I do have to apologize on the first two charts, residential building and non-residential building, the percentages should be switched. So it's my mistake. This I fired that one off a little too quickly. So non-residential construction should be the negative 49% growth rate, and then residential building is the negative 12% growth rate. But trending just how it has been lately. Scroll down. Auto industry. The top chart, new car dealers up a little bit. Again, you know, it's just 1 month, but it's the year to date up 15%. Used vehicles up 21 year over year. Again, the one that's we always talk about that's alarming, or I guess I shouldn't say alarming because it's been this way for a while, but the one that's really not good, the other motor vehicle dealers being down by about half. And auto repair is going up by 25%.
Just to refresh my memory, other motor vehicle dealers is like RVs.
RVs, boats, yeah, quads. Not like the normal vehicles, the fun ones. Next slide. I'm sorry.
Well, just kind of by way of information, with they are now imposing a higher toll on 405 through Bellevue. Increasing the toll at Tacoma Bridge, increasing tolls on 167, 69, 167. So anyway, there's conversation now that we are moving to a community. We're moving to a society where the only ones that can afford to drive are going to be the rich. Because the cost of an electric car, with the cost of the battery, with the cost of tolling, with the cost of everything else, the only ones that are going to be able to afford to drive are going to be the rich. And this is going to move people forcibly into other modes of transportation like bus or whatever. So that's the conversation where I sit on FMCIP, and one of the things we're doing is a study on overburdened communities from freight. And as we look at what is the definition of overburdened, that's how this topic came up, is that we now are seeing a segment of the community that's going to be basically squeezed out of the transportation equation in terms of car ownership. So that's how that conversation evolved.
And then next slide, this is the sectors that we're saying is showing, at least for the month, the downturn, which is unusual. So full service restaurants down 11%, and drinking places down 7%, which is definitely unusual, right? Usually someone had a couple extra bucks, they might want to spend it there. But they're not. The limited service restaurants down 4%. And again, snacks and non-alcoholic beverage bars being up 7%. Which if you look at how much it was up 23 over 22, to be even up 7%, it's pretty high. And again, that's coffee for the most part. Well done, Mary.
Keep it up.
Well done.
Down on our chair.
But so I've been led to believe that there's a shift in the drinking of alcohol from restaurants to in-home. And they can't afford to go out to eat, they can't afford to go out to drink, so they'll go home and just drink and forget about eating.
Is that just me? Or is that?
A general statement that I think is coming hard.
Sorry.
Throw yourself on the fire. Go ahead.
We could definitely look at that and see the some of the sales for restaurant or for businesses that sell alcohol.
Yeah, it's liquid diet.
Sorry. And then accommodation sectors. This is a new one that we put in. This is up 2%, which is kind of interesting with hotels and motels, again, excluding casinos, with them being up 2%, but the food and beverages in this sector is being down. Usually you would expect those to kind of tie a little bit, or fall in line a little bit more, but anyways, down or up 2% for hotels and motels. So. And that
Hopefully we'll see that Madam Chair, that hopefully we'll see that go up for the month of March, because we had all sorts of hotels booked.
Right, yeah, absolutely, it should go up quite a bit.
And we will see that revenue
Yeah,
in a
okay,
couple of months.
we'll wait.
All right.
No questions, I'm assuming.
Any other questions, comments on the sales tax? If not, we'll go into the second presentation, which is the 5-year revenue and expenditure projection.
Jason sent that Friday afternoon.
And commissioners, you should have received this electronically on Friday afternoon. If you don't have it and need a copy, I do have one here. Hand out. There you go. So this is the 5-year projection. So this is projecting 25 through 29. We have tried to project not on a conservative basis or an aggressive basis, but on an objective basis, meaning this is what, based upon history, where we currently expect to see the next 5 years. This is not a budget. We have not gone out to other, departments and saying, what do you need? What do you see? This is totally a projection. I would say the status quo going forward. On this slide, you will see that in 22, we actually had more revenue than expenses. Same way it looks like in 23, we see that. And again, 23, even though it says actual, those are kind of really forecast because we're just finishing up the numbers with the financial services. So they may change a little bit, but I don't expect much change in those. 24, that is our budgeted amount. So we had a balanced budget when we did 24. 25, that's based on a projection, and you'll see the revenue dropping and expenses dropping between 24 and 25. That's really the one-time monies that we included in the budget that we took out of our projections going forward. So things like ARP, $3 million out of fund balance for the Vista Stadium that we haven't paid yet, things like that. But then you see that as we're looking out forward, we're seeing our revenue grow at a slower pace than we expect our expenses to grow. So if we go to the next slide, we have 3 major sources of revenue: property taxes, sales taxes, and charges for services. So if we look at property taxes first, only because it shows up first if you look at the BAR's manual, property taxes come first. In 2004, property taxes made up 30% of our revenue. In 24, we're projecting that to drop to 23.4%. But here is what we've done since 2014 from a commissioner's standpoint, whether you've taken the 1% or not, and if so, how much that added to the revenue line. And then if you did a road levy shift and where that was used for. So historically, most years the commission have elected to take the 1%. They did not in 2019 or 23 or 24. This projection is based on the assumption that we will go back to taking that, with 25 taking the banked capacity from the past 2 years. But that would only increase revenue, which is in this projection, by $1.5 million. And then you would see in the years 26, 7, 8, 9, it goes up by a roughly $650,000 a year. So it's not a huge impact, even though it is a 1%. If you go to the next slide, it shows what that really means on a household basis. Now, this is based on an average household. In 25, that household average is only going up 1%. And I got that from Tom, just looking at what their reevaluations are coming at. They're actually closer to 0.5%. But then from 26 through 29, we went back to a 3% increase, which is our historical. So nothing out of the ordinary like happened in 21, 22. But as you can see, for 25, that would add $13.50 to the household if we did that 1% plus the bank capacity. 26 through 29, it would add about, $3.30 per year to the county property tax that we would charge the average household. Next slide. This just shows of the property tax, even, and that's, sorry for the, I should have made that a lot bigger. Even though we certified $64.8 million of property tax collections, the general fund doesn't get all of that. So in our budget, we only had $60 million. And that's because Veteran Services were required by statute to give some to them. It has to be at least 1.25 cents per thousand valuations, which we give a little bit more than that. That 1.125 is just over $1 million. Mental health, developmental disabilities, that is a 2.5 cent per thousand requirement. We have, as commissioners, you have elected to split that between those two, but you could put those between those two categories. You need to do the 2.5 cents. And then we have TIFs. So when we do a TIF, that of course puts property tax to pay back the investment into those TIFs. And that for the 24 is $1 million. So that's how we get to over $60 million that we get in the general fund that helps support what they do. The next slide. There we go. So this is the one Jason jumped over real quickly. Here are the county sales taxes that affect the general fund. So basically we have the 1%. So this is, we get about $47.4 million from that. So this is if you buy goods in the county gets the full 1%. If the goods are purchased in a municipality, the county gets 15% of that 1%. We also have the criminal justice. That is $5.8 million. Now that is a 1/10 tax, but you will see that doesn't equal the juvenile detention, which is also a 1/10 tax. The reason is the county gets the first 10%, and then the remaining amount is split based upon population of each of the jurisdictions. So that is why we only get $5.8 million per year from the criminal justice sales tax. Juvenile detention, that we do get the full 1/10% there. In 23, that was $15.8 million. That is a tax that currently has an expiration date of 12/31/25. In this projection, we assume that it would be continued, and that so we have not, for 26 through 29, we have not taken that $16 million out of this projection. So that is in here. Same way with emergency communications, $15.8 million on that 1/10. Public safety, that 1/10 is $8.6 million in 23. Again, that's where the county gets 60% of the revenue, and the 40% goes to the jurisdiction, to the municipalities. Emergency communications expires in 28. Public safety and mental health and chemical dependency sales tax, they both expire in 29. So those are the 4 1/10s that we need to go out to the voters. And this is when they currently expire. Just to note, if the voters do extend them, you need to extend by August of 25 for it to cover all of 26, because DOR requires that certification be done 3 months before year end, and they don't make a change in the last quarter.
Yeah, just for awareness, there is conversation going on now with STA that it will go out probably in the end of next year for its reauthorization of its sales tax, which is 0.2%. Now, technically, that doesn't expire, I think, until 27.
I believe that is, do you have that on your first one, Jason? See, because I know we took it off here because that was STA's tax.
Right.
Passed in 2017, that makes sense. Yeah.
I believe that was 27.
Yeah.
Commissioner French.
So, well, we're gonna go out early because as we experienced in 2015, it took 2 times. So if it takes 2 times this time, that will get us 25, 26, be reauthorized by 27. I'm just sharing information.
And that's
Yeah.
things that as
Yeah.
commissioners, as you talk with these other jurisdictions and talk about coordinating things, those are conversations you will want to continue having.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So these are these all 20-year, generally renewals?
I believe they're usually a decade.
They're only 10
I think
for all of
they're
these?
10s, yeah.
Okay. I
It's-
thought mental health was maybe
Mental health
longer.
is maybe longer with the commissioners have an option to renew via resolution, but I think we already did that once, and so now it's back to the vote.
Okay.
I believe you're correct.
Okay,
Criminal justice has no sunset.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah, the first two had no sunset on this one, so those are good. It's just the last 4 that affect the general fund that would go back out to renewal or they would sunset. Again, this projection assumes all the revenue for all of these taxes through 2029. The next slide, kind of to Jason's point, I know you've seen this one before. This shows the sales tax change by year since 2001. Again, the big drop in 2003 was when Spokane Valley was incorporated. 2004, there was still had the tech bust. Had a lot of downturn there, but then it bounced right back in 2005. But as you see from 2013 through current, we have been in the longest continuation of growth that we've ever seen. That is unprecedented. We have never gone 10 years in a row without having a downturn. What that means in dollars is on the next slide. So this is the dollar change by year. So even though some of those percentages looked rather large, like in 2005, it was only a $5.4 million change. We basically got back everything we lost when the city of Spokane Valley incorporated. 2021 was a huge increase year. That of course was COVID when all the federal money came out. Everybody was concerned because we didn't know what was going to happen with COVID. People were losing jobs, but with the federal stimulus, we actually ended up having a good period for the 21 and 22. So that is the largest source of our revenue right now. Back in 2004, sales tax was only 12.5% of our revenue. This year, it is over 30.5%. So it has basically taken the place of property taxes. So this is our biggest area of revenue, our largest single source, but it is also probably the most volatile. It can swing more. So as we look forward, that is, a risk. But as you can see, what we've done in 25 and 24, which we talked about previously, is we planned a 2% growth, trying to be a little conservative during this time. And we went back to normal growth of 4% starting in 26 through 29. So that's what these numbers are based on. The third largest source of revenue is on the next slide, and that is our charges for services. No surprise, our law enforcement contracts are our largest source from that. Charges for services make up 30% of our revenue is, gonna be a little bit high, but around 30% of our revenue. Half of that is from our law enforcement contracts. When we did this projection, we assumed those would go up based on the same rate that we assumed salaries going up in their projection. And we did that because it's mostly labor. And again, this is most, the largest customer in this area is, of course, Spokane Valley. The second largest revenue and charges for services is our detention services, our detention contracts. Currently, that makes up 21% of our charge for services. When we did our projection going forward, we did leave this revenue stream flat because we are seeing more, the county being responsible for more and more of the population in the jail because more and more of it is felonies and going less to misdemeanors. So we did not plan. So even though costs are going to go up for wages and items like that in the jail, NAFCA, we did not project any increase in revenue back to the other jurisdictions. And then the third largest piece of charge for services would be the auditor's office with vehicle licensing and elections. That equals about 9% or $6 million a year in revenue. And of course, those revenues fluctuate a little bit each year based upon even years. Of course, we get a little bit less revenue from elections, and odd years we get a little bit more. We did build that into this projection. And then we have a bunch of other little miscellaneous charges for services. They equal a large $15 million or 22%, but really they're all too small. We didn't call them out specifically. Next page, either just some assumptions we used in building the expenditures. Salaries and wages, we used a blended rate. So most of our contracts have a two-step raise in them per year. And a lot of our contracts have COLAs. So with that information, we projected out that if that continued to be the case, where this would go. The other important point is we did not base this on budgeted positions, but we based this on 2023 actual expenditures and projected out. Historically, the general fund has been running at about 1,350 full-time employees, even though we have about 1,500 budgeted or authorized. So this is just based on actuals that you will see in the projections. Benefits, we had some increases in there. The largest one would be medical rates. We assumed a 5% increase in medical rates. I know outside of government, that seems like a very small percentage, but I think inside of government, and since we are self-insured, I feel comfortable with that going forward. Contracted services, for most part, we budgeted for most of those 5% increase. A lot of those are labor-based, like NAFCA, we just had a 5% increase on. So as we projected that out, we also used a 5% multiplier there. Capital expenditures, when we get to the next slide, you will not see a lot that we put in the projection for capital expenditures. The only thing we put in there was the interest earnings from the other funds that we now receive based on the resolution from last year. So we did not use that revenue to offset expenses. We just said that would be committed completely to capital per that resolution. Some things we have not included in the projection. You haven't included anything with the possible public defense changes. So for indigent defense, and of course that has far-reaching impacts to us, but that is not in these projections. Those numbers are we haven't put pen to those numbers yet. So we did not build those in. And then we also did not include the 10 new deputies that Spokane Valley is asking for. Again, we went based upon what we actually spent in 2023 and provided multipliers going forward to 2029. So then with all of those assumptions, next page kind of gets you to an income statement. And again, I know it's NITES, which is what, yes. you may.
It's on the Valley deputies, is that kind of a wash, because it's expense and revenue when
It should be a wash, yes.
we're not really.
But I did not put either one in there.
We haven't,
Okay.
I would say that would require an interlocal agreement change for the Valley law enforcement contract, which hasn't come in front of the commissioners yet.
Right, but it's basically a wash, so we're not,
It should be a wash.
we're not making money on that contract.
Yeah.
And then the public defense, I think, is there a calculator that just came out?
We did get a calculator that came out last week, I believe it was.
So I thought,
And I haven't run numbers. I don't know if Mike Sparber has or not.
Yeah, Mike has it, he's gonna be working with Colin and Victoria to put some numbers together for that.
Again, I just wanted to call out that those were not part of this projection. So on the screen, this is NITES, which is also why I wanted to send it to each of you electronically. This is kind of, and Mary, Commissioner CUNY would be familiar with this. This is an income statement format for bars, but basically it shows your revenue at the top, what we actually had in 22, 23, budget 24, projections 25 through 29. And then also the expense side. So between the salaries and wages, benefits, supplies are going to be things like office supplies, paper, things like that. Services would be your charge for services. For example, NAVCare or anybody else where you go and you hire them to do the job for you. Capital, you see that going down significantly because the only capital we planned to give was for the interest revenue from the other funds. And then we have our debt service that is scheduled out through 2029, and that's our current debt service. That does not include any future issues that we may do. So with that, it shows, it just shows that our expenses, it looks as on this projection, are outpacing our revenues. So next part of this presentation is fund balance. Go to the next slide. So during all the good years, the Board of County Commissioners has been very good about not spending that on one-time things, but putting that money aside. So our fund balance has grown. There are 5 areas of fund balance that get reported. The first 2 we really can't do as commissioners. You have no ability to do much in. So you have the non-spendable and the restricted. So the non-spendable would be things where I've already paid for an insurance contract, but it goes into next year. I've already bought inventory, bullets, whatever. So it's not really money that I can go spend. Restricted is going to be things restricted by the Fed. So like if you have grants, this money can only be used for this specific purpose. The last 3 categories are really under the commissioner's control, and these would be called the unrestricted, and they are broken down between committed, assigned, and unassigned. The largest committed one, which we will talk about on the next slide, is going to be the amount of money that we say we are committing toward next year's budget in our fund balance. So as we go to the next slide, this shows our unrestricted fund balance as a percentage of the next year's budget and or in this case projection. That's why you don't see anything in 2029 because I did not take 29 out into 30 because I didn't do a 2030 projection. So as you can see in 2010, the county had a policy that their unrestricted fund balance should be at least 10% of the future year's budget. And those were lean times and we barely stayed above that. But then when we started having good sales tax collections in 2017, we didn't spend that money. You as commissioners or previous boards put that money aside. And so that percentage actually grew. And to the high point of 2021, it grew to 41% of the future year's budget. In 2022, the commissioners passed a resolution to go to best practices. So we were at 10% of the future year's budget in unrestricted fund balance. Best practices is 2 months, which is 16.67%. And so from 20, and we're assuming that is going to continue. That helps you with your bond ratings, things like that. So this, as you see this decline, that is because this forecast, we're just forecasting revenue and expenses, but we haven't forecasted any changes to what we do. So we are forecasting the use of unrestricted fund balance to meet the shortfall. You'll see that better on this next slide.
So along that theme, and as a result of the Supreme Court decision, or no, AOC decision with regard to the public defenders, there is now, and I don't know how much it's going to spread, but there is the beginning of a conversation that says, you know what? We have to be able to be in a position to control our cost. We're going to cap the number of cases the prosecutor can file charges on. And that way you control the cost of the prosecutor, and then you can then control the cost of your public defenders. I don't know whether it's illegal or whether it's actually something that a county could do, but I was struck by the fact that it was a conversation that was brought to me last week and said, what do you think of this idea? And I'm going, I think you're heading to trouble. But the fact that people are starting to talk about how do we get around the AOC requirements? How do we get around all of these other unfunded mandates and try and get control of the cost and stuff? So I just share it with you. I don't know whether it's going to go anywhere or not. I don't know whether it's just frustration as a result of the decision or what's going to happen, but I know a lot of counties are, well, you know as well as I do. I mean, this is going to be a big topic for counties for the next couple of years, at least, in terms of how we're going to deal with this and how the legislature is going to deal with it and stuff. But it's an interesting approach.
I mean, I think we've even talked about that with the lack of prosecutors, that there's potential that we have to limit the number of cases right now.
Well, and maybe one of the ways we control our budgets, just to say that's how much we're going to spend for public prosecuting office and manage it, you know, and then it forces them to pick and choose what courses they're going to take and which ones they're going to deal.
But the public defenders are in it, like, it's getting reduced by 2/3. I mean, so it's like, so we're gonna spend whatever it is now, it's 2 times that, 3 times that.
Yeah.
So, it's trying to figure it out, and some charter counties actually have it in their charter that as soon as it's adopted, they have to.
Comes the
meet
law.
it.
Yeah.
So I think Snohomish has it in their charter. So, where there's a phase-in period and all of that, but yeah, no, there's some counties that are concerned that it could bankrupt us.
Well, and the one commissioner that was sharing this idea with me last week was saying, you know, from our standpoint, you know, we're gonna force the prosecutor into, let's make a deal. You know, and how do you make deals to try and control your, not only your prosecuting costs, but your public defender costs and your jail costs. And if the state won't help us, draw a line.
Commissioner French, I believe that also control your court costs as well.
Yeah.
So you have less.
Yeah.
Through the court system.
So just take heed there, sir, you know,
Lots of litigation coming.
probably so.
So anyway, this next slide. It's just really showing the fund, the unrestricted fund balance in dollars. As you can see, as previously said, thankfully the commissioners in the past did not spend all the money in the good years. They only didn't use one-time money to spend it. They stuck it away for a rainy day fund. This projection is showing the use of that rainy day fund, so to speak, and that the unrestricted would go from the current balance of about 94.5 million down to 9.4 million by the end of 29 if we did not do anything different. And I think that is really the point of this presentation, is to say, you know, this is what we see going out. It's not dire, it's not you have to do something tomorrow, but this is where we see it going if we stay status quo. So next slide. Really just what do you as commissioners want for next steps? We see that we could do a monthly strategic planning if you want more on this. If you want to see other iterations or what ifs, you could, you know, we could do that the first Monday of each month. We also have coming up, what messaging do we want for the 2025 budget? Those budget letters will go out first part of June. So, and we get that on the next slide. So sorry for me jumping ahead. And then any other areas of analysis that you guys would like to see from us in these upcoming meetings.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. So can I ask about those two last, the unrestricted balance
Yes.
slides? So help me understand, you're saying in 2021, it doesn't mean we used 41%.
No, if the
We
previous
had
slide.
41% in
In-
restricted reserves?
Yeah, so
Okay,
that
no.
90, so
The
if you look
next
at,
year.
so that
Okay.
97.3 million in unrestricted fund balance equaled 41% of the 22 budget.
Okay,
So in 22, we had 93.7 million of unrestricted fund balance. That equaled 37.4% of the 23 budget. And then in 23, we have projected $94.6 million of unrestricted fund balance, which would equal 34.9% of the 24 budget. So that first slide is what percent of the unrestricted fund balance would it cover of the next year's budget? And then the second slide is what was the unrestricted fund balance, or what do we project it to be going forward?
so just in a nutshell then, it's showing, I mean, I get that it's showing we'd have to spend more and more of the unrestricted fund balance, but it's also showing that we have more in unrestricted balance than the 18 or the 16% that
Correct,
we have established as our,
as our floor.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. That is correct, and it also shows that if we did nothing different, we would go through about 2027 and before we fell under that.
Thank you for helping me understand. It's just, yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it, but I appreciate the slides. So, thank you.
So just for historical perspective, could you go back to the one slide that's, I think it's before here? There you go. So while the bond markets are looking for you to maintain a minimum of 10%, it's really not 10% because, and that's why that line is jumped up to 15%, because if you have to tap into it and you're at 10%, now you're below 10% and you jeopardized your bond rating. So you really want to stay at 15 or 20%.
Best practice.
So that if you ever have to tap into it, you never get close to the 10% margin. But the other part of it that they look at is the trend. If you've got, Dan, this is a great example. If you've got a trend that says you're starting to use more and more reserves to get through the year, that also is a negative against you in terms of the underwriters. Because they say, wait a minute, you're using more of your reserves to maintain operations. What are you doing to change that? Kind of a deal. So.
And that's really what the slide after this one also is showing, to Commissioner French's point. While we see it flat here at the top, if the bond market sees it going down as in these out years, what are they doing? What is the county doing to change that from happening?
But is there a reason why, I get that in 21, we had the COVID, we had lots of
We had a lot
government
of sales
care.
tax.
Okay, and then the sales tax was generated in the county, which was a change from previous. We see that change in the sales tax that's trending more to your residents versus to the store, right?
That and total spending.
Right.
It was mostly driven by total spending increasing, but it was also partially driven by the fact that less people were going to municipalities like the city of Spokane
Right.
that were having it delivered to their house.
So is there a reason why we're up in that 36 to like 35 to 36% when historically we've been more at the 19, 20,
That is because our current unrestricted fund balance is high enough to equal that much of next year's budget.
Okay.
So this is truly a function of unrestricted fund balance and the next year's budget, or in this case, projection. This is not a budget.
The other thing is that we've experienced, I think, 4 or 5 years of $1 billion of new investment every year in a growing economy.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we were growing, the rest were not. And so that also contributed to that building reserve.
Got it, that 10 years of growth. And then the huge jump in sales tax at the,
21,
Right.
22, it's just sheer dollar volume.
Yeah, I think simply put, it's in years where the county has experienced a surplus, revenues over expenses, the commissioner said, we're going to place those into reserves as opposed to building it into our ongoing costs. It's just budget sustainability, budget prudence, and that's what the decision was. So, and it this kind of shows right now that the wherewithal of doing that, because we do have some times right now where if we do nothing, we're going to be eating into it and beyond it. And
oh, and I was just gonna ask, in the model, did you estimate, I know our contracts with our bargaining units are coming up over the next year. How did you estimate increases for compensation in your model?
Yes.
Kind of based on historical trends?
Yes, historical trends.
Ron, could we go to the next step slide? So my sense is that a do nothing approach is not going to be what the commissioners want to do. So that's why we suggested having these types of meetings the first Monday of every single month. Keep it on your radar. We're gonna be going into budgeting season. Seems like we just got done with it, but we're gonna go into budgeting season here pretty soon. I think the budget office never feels like we get out of budget. So there's a lot of levers that can be pulled, as the commissioners know, not only on the revenue front, but on the expense front. We could certainly come up with ideas, and Randy shared just basic assumptions that are in here. They're not the right assumptions. They're just, we had to have a starting point for you all to consider. So what other revenue levers do you want us to look at? What other expense levers do you want us to look at? So that we can start to run some sensitivity analysis on these, show the results of certain decisions that you might want to make, or certain suggestions that you might want to make. How does it help us kind of reshape those out years, so that we are not showing our revenues are under our expenses? And these are forecasts. They're the farther out you get, the less confidence you have in them. So it's not, as Randy mentioned, it's not like this is sky's falling. It's just, hey, we do show that if we do nothing, that something negative is going to happen. So now's the time to be able to start helping make some of those decisions, so that we reshape that line, and we're not showing that revenues are under expenses for a number of years. There may be a couple of years where you feel like it's appropriate to use some use of reserves as the economy starts to kind of reshape itself, and perhaps we start to get back onto some of our historical trend lines. But even in that, we've went back to, shown 2 years of sales tax staying at 2%, and then jumping it back up to our historical 4%. So unless it grows even higher, it still would indicate that we have some adjustments that have to be made. So again, didn't need any decisions from you today, just wanted to get this in front of you so you have some eyes on what the projections look like. And just as any good budgeting and forecasting process that you all go through, it's really helpful for us to look beyond 1 year of a general fund, because decisions you make today have impacts down in the road, as you all know. So we've got some ideas that we can share, but we wanted to plant the seeds and hear back from you. So when we come back in a month, what are some things that you'd like to see in it? So to the extent that you have some suggestions for us in the interim time, share them with us, and we can start running some different scenarios of the projection plans.
So I guess my thought is, we just got a presentation from our prosecutors, and we know that we are challenged in retaining highly qualified prosecutors, because we are more than historically out of the range of pay compared to our competitors. So I'm concerned that we need to look at some I would like to get some more information on some of the maybe shorter term decisions we might need to make. And then also make a plan for what are these longer term adjustments, right, that we need to plan for. So that my concern is what you're saying. Sometimes the out years where sales tax might be worse than what we're thinking. And then also we have some workforce, I think, that are out of whack with our, with their compensation compared to our competitor counties. So we probably need to look at that a little bit more closely, but I know that our HR department's already looking at that in anticipation of bargaining in the next year. So, but that would be helpful to look at what are some of the short-term budget adjustments we might need to make versus ones that may take us 5 years, over setting a plan in motion. But I mean, we know that employee costs, benefits, and pay are the biggest portion of the general fund. So a lot rests with that information and the work that we do in the next 6 months to a year in that area, I would think.
The way Randy and team have the model built up is you can do those individual plug and plays, add them in there, do some different percentages, and it helps see what the impact is on the future. So,
because that's my concern, is that there are some areas, like we know the prosecutors, it's more than the traditional 3%, maybe employee increases.
And the, my sense is that it's not going to be just one or the other that you have to make decisions on. It's not going to be revenues only or expenses only. It's probably have to be a combination of both. And just to, address the, numbers in here are showing that all vacancies as of the end of 2023 are not included in this projection. It's about 150 positions. They're not included in there. So that's already basically informing. We took some budget vacancies in past years on some of our departments, not all. But this is truly assuming that none of those positions get funded or filled in the general fund. And that still shows us that we have a expense line that's outpacing our revenue in a couple years.
The base was 2023 actual expense, Jim Scott's point.
Well, in addition to that, I mean, there's also the opportunity to grow our revenue. And so what are some of the strategic investments that we can make to help grow our revenue during this time period so that it changes the trajectory? Because what Randy has done is assuming that we do nothing. And if we do nothing, we ought to be out of office. So there's opportunities for us to change that dynamic.
And then the very last slide that we had on there was just a draft of a 2025 budget timeline. We're in the April-May timeframe now. That's really the strategic planning. Going down to the budget adoption on December 2nd of 24, which is the Monday following Thanksgiving. So we show the property tax decision being made on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. The budget being adopted on the Monday following Thanksgiving, because Thanksgiving is November 28th. It is the latest it can be. So it makes our budget season really tight. So you can play around with this. These are not carved in stone. But these are things we need to think about as we get toward that budget. When do you want to hold these discussions?
Dave, the hard work on it. Seats, and we've got Scott Chesney and Jessica Butler.
Good morning, commissioners.
Good morning.
Thank you for your time. This will be a chance for us to talk about some of your emphases in our upcoming comprehensive plan. And one, having been listening to Randy now for a few minutes, it seems pretty clear that we're going to be working on our economic development element in a very serious way to make development easier and productive here in the county. What we have for you today is a series of educational slides about the basics of GMA planning and how that's changed over these last couple of sessions. And then, and I hope to do that fairly quickly, and we're going to actually skip some of the slides that are in the presentation because they're fairly routine and focus on the new highlights. But then go into the more topical aspects of the plan. What do we want to start thinking about for emphasis on these various pieces, and use that as we start to build our approach with the public and with others. So, as part of that, we have a separate handout for you that goes into a lot more detail on some of the issues that are coming up here, notably the housing element, the climate element, some of the other pieces that are coming along here. Both the slides and this handout will be up on our web this afternoon. So if we can, next slide, please, Rob. Basics are of planning that you generally know. We've got the essentially the fundamental difference in county planning of managing urban growth areas That kind of sets the tone for everything we do. Next slide, please. And then there's three elements that are really important to remember, that the plan is that policy statement of how we intend to grow the county, whereas the development regulations are the controls to generate that piece from happening. Importantly, for Growth Management Act, the counties are recognized as regional governments. That essentially means that as the communities are putting together their comprehensive plans, they must be consistent in conformance with the county plan, and we do so together in partnership to make sure that happens. Next, please. There are many, many components to the comprehensive plan. You can see some of them come from the state, some come from regional policies that go into that plan. The community vision being a critical element of doing that. Then once the plan is there, the various pieces that come out of that, notably permitting and importantly, capital facilities. This slide is, if anything, is a reminder of how many of our departments and department heads came together a couple of years ago to band-aid a capital facilities process that was out of compliance with GMA. And now that we've done that, we're working to standardizing that so that the CFP is a derivative of comprehensive planning. And conversely, comprehensive planning takes guidance from that capital facilities program, particularly in those urban growth areas. Next slide, please. The next three slides really are going to relate to the GMA planning goals. And we're simply putting these up here as a reminder. But number 4 is one that has changed from the past. And we've highlighted just here a little bit in terms of providing a variety of housing types based on income and population differences. That's a change that has not been here before and is going to be a challenge to do from both the steering committee perspective and for all of the communities. Next slide, please.
Before you move on, so these are the goals that are articulated in the RCWs.
Correct.
But the one that is inappropriate, I think, today is reducing sprawl. We don't reduce sprawl because we don't take areas out of the UGA boundary and stuff. And Spokane County is already in the top 10% of counties across the nation that avoid sprawl. It's unfortunate my fellow commissioner is not here to hear that, but because we already do a great job of avoiding establishing inappropriate growth areas and stuff. So there's no way we can remove that, is there?
No.
Yeah, that's unfortunate because it's misleading and it's fear mongering.
I would say at the very least, it's out of date.
Yeah.
When GMA was contemplated in the early 1990s, and even by planners before that, coming together and trying to provide some statewide guidance to communities and counties, reducing sprawl was one of those overall arching elements that planners wanted to put into enabling legislation. Does it need to use those words going forward? You know, they're now 40-some years old, so there's probably other ways of doing it. Notably, we're going to talk about those in the next hour or so, because while these are our goals from the state, how we implement them is going to be up to us. So this next slide in here does represent fairly straightforward pieces that you've all seen before. Nothing in here is particularly new or challenging. Next slide, please. And then here's where we now see planning goal 14, climate change and resiliency, the other major new part of Growth Management Act, which does talk about notably greenhouse gas emissions, reducing vehicle miles traveled, and talking about disaster planning and overall resiliency for us to plan for those things. Those are going to be some of our challenges going forward. Next, please. So here are the basic elements. Some are required. They're kind of in that gray shade. Some are not necessarily required in one sense by GMA, and that's a kind of a tricky word because by one definition, if there's not funding assigned to make those happen, you don't really have to do them. However, Spokane County has in the past done most or all of these, and we will continue to do so. Next, please. This represents those elements, where they are in the RCW, and a real quick summary of what those are. Again, what you can see in the housing, or I'm sorry, the climate resiliency is the new one. And as it says, must enhance resiliency to and avoid the adverse impact of climate change. It will be challenging. Next slide, please. The first of the elements, land use, is also the summary. In our work, we will be working with you, the Planning Commission, constituents, stakeholders, on what ultimately becomes a land use map. It starts out with a hypothesis. Right now, that hypothesis is what we've got, current urban growth areas, plugging into that growth and things like that. But then this also circles around and becomes the very last thing that gets put together to summarize all of the elements that we go through. Next, please. Now we start the challenging parts. And again, we'll talk about this in detail in a moment. These next couple of slides are relating to what the element includes. And you can see the bullet points on top. And one of those is really important. The fourth bullet point that says ensures adequate zoning to accommodate housing of all incomes. The point of this element is to enable all of our communities, the county, the cities, the towns, to modify their development regulations to allow for these housing strata, if you will, at 30% of area median income, or AMI, 50%, 80%, so on. There's at least a reflection in this that we don't own the market. We can't say you must develop 1,000 units of this housing. We can say we're going to set the regulations so that it is possible to make those things happen. And so that's the ultimate part of doing this, is making sure that all of our communities have that opportunity, or their fair share, of being able to accommodate that housing if it is proposed for those areas. Next, please. And by the way, let me take a minute and send these around, because you're looking.
Well, and your fifth bullet point on the previous slide says identify and undoes, and I don't know if that's a word, racially disparate impacts on housing. But what happens if those racially disparate impacts are created by the state? Can we eliminate them? Question's rhetorical. Please don't jump to the mic to answer.
There are histories here and everywhere of racial discrimination in housing through what was called redlining, most notably all younger. So we're not unique. What's being asked is to do what you can to eliminate those barriers to housing. The handout starting on page 16 has quite a lot of the detail for some of these elements, and again, we'll hit them here a couple times today. Next slide, please. Oh, you got here's where we are. We've completed this partial inventory of current facilities, basic affordability statistics. Our team has done a really good job of pulling that data together, and we could share that with you in almost brutal detail if you're interested in it. We've got some summary documents here that come from the Commerce Department, or using Commerce as guidance. And then working on our initial programs and policies for that. We'll be working on draft goals, and then most importantly, this will be one of those areas where we are most directly connecting to our constituents, our residents, and various stakeholder groups. And they will run the gamut, as they have in the past, from interested parties to the Home Builders Association to everybody in between. Ron, if we could skip to slide 23. And what's in between are the similar slides for the various elements that you saw on the slides previously. They lay out the statutory requirements and where what's been done so far, what progress is. Because those are relatively straightforward and because time is limited, we wanted to jump to areas that we presume will have more interest for you as they do for us. So this is the first part of climate and resiliency. You can see the language on top is again a restatement of the policies. And it has the two required sub-elements, the greenhouse gas emissions and the climate resiliency for climate hazards. The one distinction we would make is, there are several as we move on. The key piece is smaller places is not required for some of the smaller communities, but the rest of these are for everybody. And one of the things we have done is offer a partnership to our small towns and cities, Spangle, and many of the very small ones, many of which have agreed to participate. So the county would be the facilitator of this element for most of those, other than the bigger cities in the metro core, which is more cost effective. And when you think about talking about climate, greenhouse gases, vehicle miles travel, it doesn't make any sense to try to do that on a case-by-case basis. Next slide, please. These are the main elements. You can see they're kind of almost bullet pointed at the bottom. There's for the support reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, foster resiliency to climate impacts, protect and enhance environmental, economic, and human health and safety, and advance environmental justice. Some of those are quantitative and empirical in terms of gases and vehicle miles traveled. Some are very qualitative and normative in terms of environmental justice. Those are things that are challenging to put into comprehensive plans, and especially in the policies that relate to implementation. But those will be some of the things that we and you will be working on in this next year and a half or so to get the basis of this done. Next slide, please.
But before you go on,
Yep.
could you define what advanced environmental justice is?
I can't today, no.
Thank you. I quite frankly, I don't know of anybody that can. I don't know what that statement means. So anyway, just throwing it out there.
It generally speaking is it's a reference to underserved communities that have been generally left out of development decisions in the past. And the point is to try to provide a voice for those that either feel disenfranchised or may have borne a negative impact. In Spokane, kind of the historical example of I-90 going through Liberty Park might be one of those, but the same thing happened in St. Paul. So it's a way of asking us to look beyond the usual process of development to those that have traditionally not been part of that process or not consulted as these things were going on. Next slide, please. So the Cliff's notes of where this is. The Commerce work has been completed. We have a work plan established. We have a contract with Commerce that is circulating for signatures, and we will be able to be up and running on that fairly quickly. We are working with our grants office and our purchasing department on requests for qualifications for professional services that will be needed for here, both on the technical and the qualitative side. We'll be hopefully releasing those this month with being able to make a selection by the end of the month or close to May. And then the one specific element, a climate policy advisory team. Unlike some of the other stakeholder groups, this is one that is where we're going to be looking at a variety of participants who have an interest in what that means. You can see the various elements there. And this does result in a new chapter for the comprehensive plan that's not been there. It will be a challenge, but I think we're positioning ourselves to do it well, to this is one of those overriding or blanket kinds of elements. It doesn't stand by itself. It covers, as you can see, it'll cover and complement many of the other policies that go through here. And so weaving this together is one of those key synthesis elements that ultimately leads to what's going to be on that land use map.
So what kind of technical advisors are you looking for then for this chapter? Would they be helping to would the climate policy advisory team be working with these advisors? Would they be doing the data, running the carbon emissions data for the county? Like what type of advisors are you looking for with the?
At the moment, we are looking for more scientific advisors. There's a group that Commerce has chartered called Cascadia Consulting that's doing an 11 county greenhouse gas analysis or inventory for us. We're participating in that. We don't yet have the skills to interpret what data are coming our way. We're going to need some help that can help understand, here's how we want to grow. How does this growth pattern or how is this impacted by a mandated or a desired reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled? There are, opportunities and challenges to that approach. But we're first looking for a scientific consulting to help us understand what do these data mean. Later on, we're also looking for kind of what we call a general planning consultant that can help us with an outside perspective, help integrate some of that together with these other elements. But those are kind of two separate actions. And we're hoping that one of those two consulting groups will also be able to take the lead at managing the environmental impact statement that goes along in parallel with this entire process, which the county has not updated since it did its first 2001 GMA plan. And so we simply can't keep referring to that document with any serious reference anymore. We have to produce a new environmental impact statement.
On the EIS, I know you talk about it later in the slides here, but isn't the EIS kind of the start of the process? Like looking at all of the different possibilities, right?
Yes. That's what you'll see in the next couple of
Okay,
slides.
we'll get there. Sorry.
But yes,
I'm jumping ahead.
It has to go in a parallel track with the entire process itself. It doesn't come sequentially at the end and then go back and analyze things. It starts at the very beginning of doing our visioning. And so it's important to have those consultants come on board right away. Next slide, please. So now we're getting into the other parts of our world, which is that 20 to 50 year horizon. You can see the metro core on the screen with the urban growth areas noted. Next, please. The first part of moving this forward is our public participation program. You can see here, this is the citation in the RCW and the WAC. The guidelines were updated and adopted by this board in mid-22. And then their accompanying countywide planning policies were updated by you in December of 22. So those are kind of the foundation documents for the public participation program itself. Next slide, please. That program has, among others, these are some of those objectives that talk about what it's going to do. It identifies the process for early and continuous public participation through the various details. And then, for example, this has been previewed with the Planning Commission on March 28th. At that time and before that, we received the first round of comments. We have already incorporated a number of those, including strengthening the commitments of the team for public participation by replacing many words that say may or could, should, with more definitive shall and will take these actions. We've also clarified some noticing, I don't say ambiguous, but some differences between how documents are noticed in the public participation program guidelines, for example, the county committed to a 21-day window for public posting on what we call final documents. So if they're coming to the planning commission for a public hearing, and we consider that the final document, we are committed to giving the public a 21-day window to look at that. In addition, normally they go up when they're posted with the legal notice at 15 days. We have a reserve requested for documents in progress, in other words, working drafts that are coming for workshops and things, that we will post those no later than 7 days. So there's still a week's worth of notice, even on a working document coming through. Next, please. The initiatives, these next 3 slides talk about the initiatives of the public participation program. And you can see there in general groups, equitable engagement, and key among that is coordinating with community leaders and advocacy groups. We know Spokane County has a rich tradition of community engagement and advocacy. We will build on that. We will use that structure in reaching out. Meeting people where they are sometimes seems like common sense, but it's not often done. Many times we make them come to us. In this case, we're committed to going out and finding places to talk about this and admittedly at the risk, in my business, it's fun to go talk to people about planning and development. Going to a farmer's market where they really just want to buy some produce, not usually a good time to get comments on zoning. So we'll balance that, how that works, but we will be out there. Next slide, please. Initiatives, and there's a correction, the second bullet should say community consultations. But this is kind of some of the tools that we'll be using. And most importantly, that 4th bullet from the bottom, virtual meetings and forums. We've all learned, as we are today, working with the world of Zoom and Teams and doing that. There are other platforms that allow for more direct interaction. We're exploring those. We're going to be bringing that on with our communications manager or the person we're trying to hire. But we intend to be able to have a much more robust visual or virtual presence where people can, at whatever time they're comfortable with, dial up a video of a meeting or get it or see a preview video of what we're talking about. Leave a comment at 10 o'clock at night or something like that. So as we roll this out, we're going to try to be as state of the art as we can with how we use our digital resources. And we realize in Spokane County there's a number of families that are not online. We see that in our building shop as these folks are trying to recover from the Gray Fire and the elk fires. We asked them, can you can do this at home. You can dial up this building permit at home. They said, we can't. We don't have any connection. We just don't have that capability. So we know that there's one end of the tech spectrum that is not in Spokane County, and we have to deal with the more traditional approach. So in those cases, we'll be going back to the 60s and 70s, where we'll be posting things in libraries. We'll be posting things in markets and grocery stores. Or here's how you find out more about these things. So that'll be the next one, please. And I guess we're just kind of talking about this one. This broad dissemination using the website, and then the other opportunities to do this. So we can go on. Next slide. Oh, yes.
Well, in reading the draft public participation plan, you have prioritized hiring someone to help with marketing and community relations,
Yes.
right? So I think that's, if somebody could be hired that is very knowledgeable, especially about reaching underserved communities, that would be really helpful to us here at the county.
Yes.
And then also looking at ways to address any language barriers as well.
Yep, we're very much aware of that. That second part is a kind of a slippery slope area, because when you start that translation, are you committing to everything or are you doing something else? Nonetheless, we're looking at how to best do that. We've been working with Pat's shop on trying to find a coordinator for our communications effort. We've talked with one individual who was eminently qualified. And we're trying to see if we can find a good fit for that, and if we can do that, bring them on board right away. There will be some sub-consultants underneath that, some maybe more along the lines of a very specific, who are the populations that we need specific translations from. But our guys, in reaching out to some of the community and ethnic organizations, have already been informed that if you need help translating this for our audience, we will help do that for you. And so we've made some of those initial introductions that would not be necessarily a paid translator, but someone who's already deeply in an organization that would take on documents and bring them forward. So it's on our screen. In your handouts starting on page 10, there's a lot on our public participation in more detail. The first the sheet you see there is the first page of a spreadsheet that is about 600 or 800 names long. And what it has is this case is kind of by organization, starts out that way. But on the parts that goes off the screen, we're listing the various elements. So you can see on this one, it says capital facilities on one, climate change on the next, it goes on to the rest of the elements. As people express interest in individual elements or multiple elements, we will populate this matrix so that by simply copying a column and dropping in an email or dropping in as something, we will be continually talking to those who actively expressed an interest in all of the elements or in individual ones. So we think we've got a good tool for keeping that in track. And then the next few pages, you can see some of the more detail than what was in before, where we were talking about what are we doing in quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3. Now we've started to put down that, the week of April 8th to April 19th, we'll be reaching out to stakeholders. And we've got kickoff meetings the last couple weeks in May, specifically in libraries around the community. So the details of reaching out are falling into place beyond the concept of, yes, we will reach out and do this. Look at that, and we can answer those questions anytime. So back to the slides. Two key issues. One is what we call visioning principles. And we started out with one that is, we think, critically important to the future of the county, particularly given the variances in how urban growth areas are ultimately managed and administered. And that means the county may in fact be administering urban areas. Our successors may be doing that forever. So that, that top one is how do we work on building neighborhoods, not just subdivisions? We've had versions of this communications with some of you individually on how we try to blend new development in with existing development. That's one part of this. It's been my experience that the development community will respond to this if what we're asking them is clear and provides an opportunity for them to use their marketing tools to get something done. There's a couple of examples. One you may think is extreme, of course, Kenley Arts, blended neighborhood. That admittedly, that's ended up being on the very high end. It didn't start out that way. It was intended to be a true mixed income neighborhood. It'll be interesting to see how Greenstone handles the Kaiser property that's also under our control, rather than city control. But also interestingly, Dave Black and the former golf course in the valley, working on lots of logistic issues, but flood control and other things, still talking about what we would consider a blended neighborhood with a variety of sizes and housing products, all being produced in what perhaps in Arizona would have been called a master plan community. It's probably not to those details, but it's at least thinking about the idea that you're creating a better quality of life than simply a grid with every home being the same 2,000 square feet. The other part of this is that second bullet, creating more mixes of uses within our projects. Can we have a zoning or regulatory code that encourages home builders to partner with commercial developers to try to blend retail and rooftops earlier on in a process? Or secondarily, can we provide a way of low impact industrial, low impact job production also within and walking distance and things of a neighborhood. Again, they're not traditionally used here in Spokane, but they've been used in other places. And our commitment is to try them and talk with the people who are in fact investing, the builders, and saying, can you do this, or what will it take to do this? And if in fact that becomes a direction from this board, we will move those things out. Yes.
So, sorry, when you say they've been used, what do you mean by they?
Around the country, the idea of blending development into projects like this has been done in, places from the Midwest to the Southwest. Part of it was called neo-traditional design for a while, or new urbanism.
Okay, I get it. I wasn't sure what you were referring to. So do we have examples of that in Washington State in urban growth areas that we could look to? Or is that?
Really
anyway,
looked.
stop.
No, I haven't really looked. Certainly the GMA contemplates it in terms of compact urban forum, as it's called. But I haven't seen a specific place, perhaps downtown Olympia, that has more of a residential presence. But it's something we'd be looking for.
And then just a follow up on, so the visioning principles, you're saying that gets built out through our public participation process. And these are just a few things you have listed as starting points. Okay.
Yes.
What about joint planning for the areas of the UGA that are adjacent to one of our cities?
Actually, on the next slide.
Oh, sorry,
What?
see, I'm always getting ahead. Okay.
But it is part of this. Ron, would you go back, please? I wanted to spend some time on this slide because the idea of these visioning principles needs to come from you. And certainly your delegation to the Planning Commission is how we will talk about them in more detail. But this strategic discussion really is focusing to a huge degree on the next two, this slide, the next slide, and then the final main slides on here regarding land capacity and urban growth on the edges. So, I mean, these basic ideas are things that we want to introduce to you today and then come back, perhaps not as close as a month, but certainly within maybe another quarter, and have some further discussion as we flesh this out with the Planning Commission and get some initial ideas from our outside public. But you see here that idea of evolving the urban growth areas. What is that going to mean? We know from GMA, we know from the settlement agreement, we know from organizations like FutureWise that Spokane County's urban growth area approach has not been wildly recognized by the rest of the state. How do we achieve what we want to do in a way that still satisfies Growth Management Act and some of the other organizations? The Lamberts, for example, we've sort of talked about those several times, but we've been working with Commerce, for example, we're now anticipating things like the North Mead Lambert, which has urban zoning, has had for some time, but is yet in a comprehensive plan category of the Lambert, limited development area commercial, limited development area residential. Commerce has, and we've talked about the idea of like, well, let's make it a place and not just a Lambert. Then we don't have this Lambert impact on it as long as it's fully urbanized. And so we're going to be looking at things like that, where we can in fact contain an urbanizing area with the growth rules of our world, and do it in a way that satisfies the Growth Management Act. And then also, not to leave it at the bottom of the list because it's not, but the idea of rural lands and clear statements of preserving lifestyle and resources. Oftentimes, what's left is the way it's discussed. We're doing cities, we're doing edges, we're doing UGAs, and what's left is the rural large lot development. It has changed over time, and we'll be looking at trying to, it's like, how should it change again over time? Next slide. So the other part of visioning that we want to explore with the board and others is what we call scenario building. which is that kind of what if analysis. And this is a lot where joint planning comes into play, particularly on our West Plains, the north side to a lesser degree, and to a different degree than the city has been interested in, but also with the city of the Valley that is interested in pursuing a joint planning approach. But it's, how do we want to look at those edges? Are we going to look at them in a way where there will be an annexation program, where there will be some disposition over time, or they will be into county management for the foreseeable future? And so the second point we put up there, unlike suburban places, extra urban places, and this is where we say some Lammers may become towns. We're not talking about incorporating, it'd still be part of the county, but they would be a place that would be able to grow in a managed way. And then some other ideas that have been done and tried in places, a unified regional planning and development agency. Seems like a long-term thing, but it could be on the horizon for a discussion. And then the idea of again, how do we handle these urban growth areas? So what we want to do over kind of the latter half of 24 is produce some of these scenarios, draw them up. What do they look like? How do they feel? How do they work? Are they feasible? And use that as a discussion point and testing for our stakeholders, for our plan commission, and for you. Yes, sir.
So, there is actually no requirement, I don't believe, that says that you have to increase density inside different parts of the UGA to accommodate this multi-use. The multi-use strategy is one strategy, but I look at Benton Franklin, for instance, that does designate a good significant part of their urban growth boundary for single family construction and stuff. So there's nothing that says you have to go to, a Redmond or Seattle format to accommodate growth.
That's a very good point. What we're talking about is an aspirational idea, not a mandated idea. The idea that there is still room for single family detached housing development is a strong market here, and that would be supported by, I think, any scenario. But it would also be allowing the option for something else. So, for example, if someone wanted to bring in several hundred acres, and it was feasible in an urban growth area, without going to a regional commercial designation that talks about that and then allows residential, it could be here's a development right that by right lets you put in single family detached housing here, but a core in the middle that could have multifamily with commercial on the first floor and residential above. And you don't have to have a difference in zoning to do it. It's all in one package. But none of this would preclude having an LDR within our development regs, at least in my opinion.
But I look at us developing land use policy that has to be influenced by what happens 16 miles down the road. And I mean, if you try and create this urban environment everywhere in the county, what you're going to see is your tax base is going to be on the other side of the state line. And we're already experiencing that, which goes back to the conversation we had earlier with Mr. Bischoff in terms of revenue. We will create the jobs and they'll take the money across the state line and they'll spend it over there, not here.
We have seen that, Commissioner. We've done our own back of the napkin analysis there, and that revenue leakage, if the developable areas around Post Falls are fully developed, that development leakage could be as much as $10 million a year in revenue to Spokane County.
Yeah.
So we're very much aware of the need to keep an entire range of development options available for the market here. All we're saying in this scenario is, rather than simply have an LDR all by itself, there's an LDR that allows other things if it makes sense for that place and at that time. It certainly doesn't anticipate building 40-acre villages all over. And yet those are simply not feasible. It has to have a bigger scale.
Well, not only not feasible, but not marketable. I don't, I spend time talking to folks that find themselves living in Seattle or Snohomish or whatever. I say, well, so what brought you here? The job. So are you living in the neighborhood you like? No. So why are you living here? The job and stuff. So it's like, okay, that's the driver. And it's not the neighborhood, it's the job brought them there. They're making compromises to have a good job.
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner French that these are concepts that need a lot more discussion.
Of course.
And study. Like, I'm not familiar with the idea of landmarks becoming towns. So that's a new concept to me that would need a lot more conversation, but I appreciate you putting out some things for us to start thinking about. I guess from my perspective, all of our vision and our kind of key planning principles would be informed by community input. And so I would want that community input into some of these different concepts before I can commit to any of those as a key planning principle for the county. So I noticed you don't have like the visioning workshop till later June, July. So is that what you're kind of thinking? That would be the time to start engaging the community on some of these concepts?
We want to find a chance for the five of you, notably, to provide some initial direction on where that process should go. Have a chance to work through the planning commission with some very basic ideas. And then our approach is to take a series of scenarios out for comment. And be able to talk about them. The idea of being able to show something to a group and say, here's what it looks like, in our experience, is a lot easier to get them to comment than the open-ended question of, what do you want?
Well, Liberty Lake could have been a Lamret. They ended up developing their own sewer and water system so that they could get sewer and water because the county wasn't in a position to extend water and sewer out there. But had we been in a position to do that, we could have, just like we did out of Highway 2. Was that fair?
Yes, yeah, I think that's true. And when we're talking about, Lamberts becoming towns, we're not talking about all of them. We're not even talking about a majority of them. There's like 2 or 3 that have enough kind of geographic mass that could be considered. The one in Meade is truly an anomaly because it's already almost fully developed, but it has full overhead services, with the sewer being extended into that from time to time. Another one that those were a study is the Four Lakes area, because it's been there, it has a designation, it's already in place, they know what they call themselves, they have a water district. It would be a place to allow for residential development to occur and expand in an area that's already served in many ways, and also close to employment, but pretty much all sides. Taking some edge pressure off of Medical Lake or Cheney that are having trouble growing in those areas. So there's a small number of these that we want to look at. And Lamberts, of course, as we know, they were left in the UGA as places that could exist because they were historically located, but they were supposed to die. Everything was supposed to go into the new urban forms. And yet if one of the elements in GMA now is to reduce greenhouse gases and vehicle miles traveled, wouldn't it be more sensible to put a small market in the middle of the Four Lakes area and to call it a place that forced those folks to drive to Cheney for milk? So GMA, even as Commissioner, you brought up some of that 1990s language, prevent small sprawl. GMA is evolving, and it's in tension with itself in many ways. Saying these Lamberts shouldn't exist, or we should not allow them to grow because that is sprawl. Well, if it's already in a place that has an identity and has water available to it, a small package plant for wastewater services could be there that would help take a number of places off of the septic system. And so there's an evolving part of GMA that I think we have a chance to take advantage of.
I know that when we did the comp plan for the city of Spokane, we contemplated the possibility of there being multiple centers and corridors, which never happened. But Lamreds, there's a basis for making that assumption that they could become that small service area for growth at the edge.
We think it's worth investigating.
The one thing that I think the comp plan has not anticipated yet is that the idea that older neighborhoods can be regentrified into these urban areas, these higher density urban areas, excludes the presence of DEI that says that, wait a minute, you cannot come in and an overburdened community and all of a sudden take away that housing for that segment of the community so that you can increase your density. So I mean, those two goals are going to conflict with each other to the point where one's going to have to give, and it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves. I mean, even the conversation going on now with Todd out at the community college, and the pushback is, wait a minute, you're not going to take my house and increase density to accommodate public transportation. But yet that's what the city said it was going to do, and it got the grant money. So, it's that pressure, that tension that, somehow is going to be factored into this.
So I think I understand what you're saying. You want help in developing the scenarios that would go out to the community for feedback later this summer.
Essentially, yes.
Okay.
We will put some ideas before you, but the idea of having some feedback from the commissioners at the very beginning gives us a lot more confidence to go talk to the community about it. Next slide, please.
Just before we leave that, with the
Okay.
joint planning,
Yes.
is there any conversation happening with the city, particularly with like the South UGA or the West Plains UGA areas about scenarios for the future?
Spencer and I are continuing the dialogue, notably on connecting West Plains through the Grandview Thorpe neighborhood and how that may be better integrated for joint planning going forward. Nothing has been formalized yet, and we both agreed to kind of put it on hold for the first part of this year because there's no new comp plan amendment out in the West Plains that the city needs to react to. So we can focus on the longer term now instead of having to deal with an emergency of some kind. And now the city of the Valley, Chaz and his team are interested in a joint planning agreement as well.
And as far as the West Plains is concerned, all three cities do want to expand their urban growth boundaries so that they can allow for growth and housing for all three of them.
And that leads us to the last part of this session, land capacity and the UGA analysis. This map, and again, this is simply the urban core. These are single and multifamily permits issued between 2008 and 22, all reported and tracked to SRTC. You can see a few areas of clustered activity, notably on the 5 Mile Prairie, on that side, the West Plains, some of the Eagle Heights.
Eagle Ridge.
Clearly, and then over toward Liberty Lake, the Southeast Valley, for example. What you don't see, and even some in the Glen Rose kind of edge of up around from Moran Prairie on the edge of the city. What you don't see really, other than one little cluster in the Kendall Yards map, and admittedly, I kind of have to squint a little bit at this scale. But this was our kind of hypothesis in 2021 when we were first starting with the city, is recognizing that centers and corridors as a plan didn't produce building permits that are clustered in any of those centers and corridors. And there's the evidence, so. And you know, those of you that are on the steering committee have recognized and have seen, the current members of the city have recognized as Councilmember Cathcart said, we overshot our example last time. We need to be careful and not take more on or ask for more growth than we can absorb.
So, but one of those that was on the planning commission for the city of Spokane, when he developed that, the challenge that we had was we presented the public with three different options. Grow as you are, central growth in the city of downtown, or centers and corridors. And nobody wanted to invest more money into downtown because we just were in River Park Square and they were done with that. They wanted change, but they wanted centers and corridors because they wanted it to be over there, not in our neighborhood. And none of them contemplated being in their neighborhood. But the one fallacy that, you know, for some of us that were there, that we did not recognize at the time was that we went through this exhaustive Horizons 2020 process, the visioning and everything like that. But we didn't keep track of the fact that the same people showed up at every single one of those meetings, and they dominated the conversation that led you to a false outcome. And so I would hope that as we do public participation, we keep track of making sure that we don't repeat that mistake of hearing the same voice over and over and over and over again and thinking it's a different voice. No, it's just same voice singing the same tune. And it led us to create a comp plan that, you know, quite frankly, was overly aggressive. But it certainly met the goal of a certain small fraction of the community and not the overall community. So hope that we keep a balance about participation.
I am, well, in terms of participation, yes, we know, and Spokane County, it's not unusual. There's always a group of participants that are actively involved, whether it's here or Phoenix. We know that group, and this program is designed specifically to broaden that horizon, to get out so there are other voices coming in beyond those that are most actively committed to watching what we do. That said, as many of you know, the centers and corridors idea was instrumental in my interest in coming to Spokane in 2011. Because on paper, it was a really great way of talking about creating compact urban form. I was totally impressed with that. When I looked in detail, first off, it was like, it's too much. You can't have 27. You're spreading. We don't have the resources to have that kind of energy in 27 of these. You need like 5 of them. And this arbitrary number, but you could see that it was a great idea on paper, but we as a city never had the development ranks to actually make it work. And so it was kind of destined to fail. Now, like as I said, to the city's credit, in our conversations, Spencer Gardner, Steve McDonald, they are honestly and actively looking at revising centers and corridors for the first time in 20-some years. So at least they're coming to the table in a way that should do them some good. But again, that's their side of the river, not ours for the moment.
They got to abandon DEI if they want to do that.
So anyway, we
you have
put
to
this slide
create
up.
policies that require, not displacing. I mean, there's policy you could put around that as well.
I mean, the policy, if you can maintain that income bracket for housing that is typically displaced through regentrification, then that means you've got to create a policy that says that we're going to subsidize housing for a period of time. And then that's a revenue item. Where are you going to get the revenue from to be able to do that? I mean,
Yeah, it's tricky.
every time I've had a developer that specifically targeted low income housing, Eagle Ridge is a great example. We had a whole section of it where we required the developers to price point their product in a specific category so we could go after that low income.
And what happened was the buyers came in, got a great deal on the house, and then they upgraded to granite countertops instead of plastic laminate, hardwood floors, and by the time they got through with the upgrades, you've lost your entry level product and stuff. So it's one thing to say it, but to be able to do it. Market hasn't found a way to do it, and it's. I wish we could, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I've not seen a way to do it yet. That's what I worry about.
Yeah, you're really gonna have to think carefully, like with the East Sprague area, when we were doing the revitalization,
Yeah.
when I was at the city. We made some efforts and we did build more affordable housing that for folks that might have been displaced if the market drove, renovation of older homes there. But it wasn't policy based though. It was hopeful.
Well, and
And
the other,
you're right, it needs to be based on like the policies need to really be thinking about how do you. You're gonna have some housing become unaffordable to some, so how do you ensure that there's affordable housing that's still in that area?
well, and how do you assure that the housing that's going to be available is ownership? As opposed to, yes,
Just
you've met
rental.
an income threshold, but you've turned them into renters instead of homeowners. That's the other challenge.
But yes, we had conversations about North Monroe. And you can't just have a half block
No.
off of a corridor. You have to have a real plan that goes blocks off of a corridor to
It
have the
needs
reinvestment happen.
a comprehensive redevelopment solution. So, even back when we're talking about building neighborhoods instead of subdivisions, like your package, make this work.
I'm glad to hear they're looking into that.
Can we go on?
Sure, why not?
You have seen this slide before. I brought it up as a reminder. This is our benchmark. The orange dashed line is the mid-range from the OFM. And that shows us getting to the roughly 650,000 population level by the 2046 horizon. Next slide, please. Where that really abstract line goes down to the details is here. This is the first draft or the first cut of the population analysis allocation by community that the PTAC is working on and will go to the steering committee in May. For the first time, you can see the basis for breaking out these numbers, and the memo for this is on our web too. But it breaks it out. In this case, it's based on the share of population and how that growth happens, and this is also manually adjusted to ensure that at least at this first cut, no small town has negative growth. Because if you do the math on things, how they've changed, some of the small towns have in fact shrunk in 20 years. And so you put them on that trend line, they're just gonna continue to lose population. We want to provide.
But the city of Spokane has actually dropped in percentage of population for the county.
Yes.
I mean, when I first got here, the city was sitting at around 44, 45%. Now you're at 42%. So
And projected at 39.
projected at 39, yeah.
So go ahead, Ron.
Can I ask one thing? So I don't think this graph or this grid has, but at the steering committee, one of the things, it looked like, and maybe Commissioner French, it looked like 10 years ago, or actually I guess it was a little more than 10 years ago, when we last looked at the projection was that unincorporated outside UGA was going to see a huge amount of growth, which didn't happen. There was a lot of unincorporated inside UGA, but essentially those two were flip-flopped. So it looked like the prediction was that the growth was going to be outside UGA more than inside, and it ended up being the inverse. Why over a decade ago was that thought to be where there was going to be a lot more growth was outside UGA and unincorporated? I think I asked the question, but Scott said he wasn't there for it, but I thought,
So
you might be the only one that was around at that time.
yeah,
with the parting of the seas.
So you've been here forever.
I know you're,
Light way to put it, yeah.
I know you were thinking of it. Okay, so, no, I think the dynamic that influenced that was access to water. And I think, you know, when you go back to, you were here when we were dealing with the McCleary situation, not McCleary, Hearst situation and stuff. And everybody, you know, we had people that were, I mean, even developers that wanted to develop their property couldn't because they didn't have access to water and stuff. So that really forced a lot of that development to happen inside the UGA that otherwise would not have happened
Okay.
and stuff. So I think that was the biggest dynamic.
Well, and along that line, Commissioner Kearns, this does turn that projection back to a more logical future, which is the unincorporated UGA properties will be the fastest, at this projection, will be the fastest growing in the next 20 years. The city itself second, and the city of the Valley third. All of which means, again, we have to plan for those UGA areas in a very different way than just simply assuming those are going to annex into a city anytime soon. This will be, I would call it an iterative process. Every city gets a chance to take a look at this and say, we agree, we disagree. If they disagree, they have to show us why. They have to show us their work, and they have to have a rationale for it. You know, we know Medical Lake wants to grow. And so creating policies that encourage that growth will change that number from 0 to something. So this will come back several times, but you know, that key takeaway, the unincorporated urban growth areas, our management areas are still slated to grow faster than any other place for the next 20 years. Next slide, please. So that's the population side of it. Now the geography side of it. This slide shows the areas that are bounded by an urban growth area boundary around our small towns that were put in rural zoning designations at the time of the creation of the urban growth areas and the Growth Management Act. I presume because nobody knew how they would grow, so it's like, let's just leave them in this until we know better. Well, because of the 2013-2016 settlement agreement and the way growth management now has changed, we have to accommodate, we have to reallocate all of these acreages into an urban growth category for 2026. And so this is our piggy bank, if you will, of the first cut at potential growth areas. But what that means is smaller growing places that might have, you know, even for example, Medical Lake has, you know, 200 and some acres. So some of it's, you know, conservation industrial. They're going to, and if they can justify a growth area, they may end up with a 10 acre or a 20 acre urban growth area because we have to right size these now. But what you can see there is a total of about 2,300 acres in these rural designations that have to be accommodated. We have to use these acres to accommodate growth before we can take the step of expanding the boundary beyond these acres. So this is going to be a big shift for our planning.
So can you go back to the previous slide, please? So in Waverly, have we notified the couples that need to get busy here to get to the 11? No, I'm just kidding. Never mind.
Okay, thank you. Rod, next slide, please. Or the one after.
I just seconded it.
Oh,
Sorry.
you got it.
You show me where,
Can you explain it out?
where on the 23,000 number that you said, 2,300, where is that?
On the slide, it's just the total of those acreages.
Oh, at the bottom there. Okay, thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. This is a pretty high level analysis of the urban growth area availability in the metro core UGAs for low density residential or elderly zoning alone. And this was not just, you know, kind of that test for housing. There's about 2,000 acres as of last year that we saw as undeveloped on air photos. We looked at those a little more critically and pulled out a minimum of 25% for infrastructure development on the property. And then looked at steep slopes, critical areas, anything else, and called that unbuildable. It came up with a net of a little under 1,300 acres. That 1,300 acres at those density ranges, 3, 5, and 7 units per acre, and the development patterns for the last several years in the county, even after the county board increased the LDR to as much as 8 to 10 units an acre. The pattern is holding pretty close to 5 units an acre as a kind of a gross. So if you look at that, at the 5 number, that accounts for 6,300 units and about 13,000 persons. If all of that developed at a much higher 7 units per acre in single family, it's 18,000 population. But we have 100,000 people that we've got to account for. And so this, what we're showing is that this part of the UGA, as it's currently bounded, is woefully insignificant, even assuming that the cities themselves take a giant share of that population. If you take that 2,300 acres at that same, let's say 5 units an acre and 2.5 persons per household, that accommodates a total of that acreage and this acreage accomplishes a total of about 63,000 persons, and we're expecting 100,000. Now that may be a little more plausible in the sense that if the cities absorb 40, that 60 could go here, but we're trying to balance those things. So the challenge we're looking at is how do we use that 2,300 acres of rural UGA to reposition it in places where growth can in fact grow? Because that's going to be the easiest calculation to make on top of everything else. The county's been accused of having an oversized urban growth area for years. Here's a way of using what we have before we are looking to produce something else. So that, as we see it, it's going to be one of the single biggest challenges before us. Flip to the next slide, please. So these are just a couple of illustrations. You can see the airway heights there and the medical lake diagrams. But we're looking at 2 options. One is to simply follow through on the analysis, urban growth, the LCA, and reallocate the acreage to where it's needed as the first blush and say, is that enough? The second would be we actually find out that it is enough in many cases, and we hold some of that in reserve. And that holding something in reserve has never been contemplated by GMA. But with Senate Bill 5834 allowing swaps, the idea of saying, well, we know we're going to grow here, but we want to hold this other part to accommodate future growth that we can't yet predict. That might be a tougher argument for Jessica to defend, but at least it's something that that we want to throw on the table, because this is going to be just an interesting challenge all the way as we go forward. Next slide, please. Here you can see outside of the cities, these are the unincorporated area vacant parcels. Now they're not all in urban growth areas, but this is the universe of land that is actually available for development. One more slide, please. And this is our what should be considered the low-hanging fruit. These are the areas that are in that urban reserve category at the low or the limited development areas for commercial and residential, much like that Meade area on the north side, and the rural activity centers such as the Four Lakes, Lambert. This is where our predecessors anticipated growth right now, or to grow after the current plan. These urban reserve areas were designated to keep their higher acreages, as much as 40 units an acre, prevent land division, and to move forward. And so you can pretty clearly see the big area between the existing West Plains and the cities, Grandview, Thorpe. You can also see the one that comes off south of the Moran Prairie and wraps around the hills back toward Highway 195. Those are big areas. You can see the one that historically wasn't supported at all, but was still planned that way. The 5 Mile Prairie is all in urban reserve. and a lot of it has developed. So in a sense, these are supposed to be where we first look for new lands to come into the urban growth area. And so we kind of just throw that up as a sense of, this is our first target area by our current plan. So any other thoughts about growth at this point? And if not, I can summarize kind of quickly where we're going for the next 2.5 years.
Didn't Rose, it's got all that development potential there?
Yeah, the terrain there.
Yeah, right. So in 2013, when we were looking at expanding the urban growth district, that area there that lies between Geiger and 195 that you have identified there, we tried, well, no, I want to rephrase that. The city put on the list that area to be included in the UGA. And it was there for a long time until we got to the end of the process, and then got inundated with letters and everything from property owners in the Grandview Thorpe neighborhood that said, over our dead body. We do not want to be inside the UGA. Interestingly enough, it went from there's no infrastructure here to support growth. We all know that. But the other part of it is they said, if we're inside the UGA, then the city can annex us, and we don't want to be annexed. But they're a neighborhood council inside the city, which is kind of an interesting conundrum. But I just, if that's going to be an area that we want to consider, there's some real challenges with that. I think it's a great area, but there's some real challenges there.
And let me be as clear as I can. These areas were picked by our predecessors 20 years ago as urban reserve areas.
Got it. Okay.
This is not our
Thank you.
recommendation for
Thank
study
you.
areas. This is
Yeah,
what.
that provided great clarity. Grandview Thorpe, so if you look at this area right here. Yeah.
Just east of that West Plains area.
Yeah, just east of the West Plains.
And I've been here long enough to know the volatility of some of these areas.
Yeah.
5 Mile Prairie.
Oh,
And, the area on north, going up Argonne Road. To that little tiny bit of UGA that was left in for the convenience store at Argonne and Bigelow Gulch. That FutureWise was disproportionately angry about a 2-acre site staying in the urban growth area. That whole area is part of the urban reserve. That's where you would logically grow coming out of the valley to the north, because you've got access to urban services. You could drain that from sewers. But would it be desirable? That's ultimately up to you in public policy. But all I'm saying, these were the ones highlighted years ago. And I guess that leads on to these last few slides. Ron, if you could, one more, please. Here's where we're still proposing on 24, and I guess that 5th bullet point down is creating these new urban growth area projections and study areas. We intend to be able to bring back to you, the steering committee, PTAC, again, it'll be iterative, but where are the study areas that we think make the most sense, from willingness to develop to availability of water and sewer urban services in the path of development. And then that will provide a study point that we will take back and keep testing. Do these make sense? Can we provide these services out there? Can we afford to provide services out there? So that later on in the process, that UGA gets locked down. But it's our goal to have some guidance for this board by the end of the year as to what the urban growth on our edges generally looks like, at least in terms of scale, if not in terms of precise location. And so you can see also the last one here. As those things come together, as we talk about visioning, as we talk about scenarios, we're going to be having a parallel process on what do the development regs need to look like to make this happen. And it's something we've previewed with you before, the idea that that exclusionary zoning is not helpful anymore. It's out of date. The city has tried form-based coding in places. Others have tried performance zoning. The idea of being able to make things happen more by right, but with conditions on them, is a way of providing an option so that, among others, you don't have to go through 4 or 5 or 10 comp plan amendments every year, because you're building in some flexibility for the land to adapt, both in terms of residential densities within limits or conditions, but also the idea that you can have mixes of uses when these things are urbanized. And so we'll be doing that again in a parallel process. Next, please. 25 is cranking the box. It's going through iterations of the ideas. It's writing the chapters into that initial plan. It's creating some of those development regulations and then going through, the meetings and testing all the way through that with both public engagement, partner engagement. And then 26, kind of the next slide, please. The home stretch, so to speak. It is our goal to have essentially a complete draft document at the end of the first quarter of 26, leaving the second quarter for the final reviews, tweaking, and then through the statutory process of notices with our agencies, the steering committee, planning commission, and ultimately the board. Next, please. Sorry, Amber.
So just a quick, so in the roadmap of the 24, 25, 26, how does the capital plan inform all these different pieces in the financing? What is financially feasible to support, with
Good
water, sewer, other essential services?
I'm glad you asked, because we skipped over that in the earlier slides. It happens in 2 ways. There's an annual cycle where all of the departments that have capital needs puts together a capital improvements program. We are working with their staff and their directors to do that now in sync with the comp plan. And so for 24, we will have that CIP. We're hoping the Friday before Labor Day. And then we will look at that and put the pieces into the comp plan that fit there, so that when the budget is adopted at the end of the year, the CFP meets the requirements of the comprehensive plan. That will be the annual process. It'll be a little bit analogous to what the city does with its 6-year transportation plan. It brings it forward every year to the planning commission. It's part of the planning thing. We want to bring the CIP into that level of connectivity with the comp plan. So for the 26 part of it, we're now adjusting the fact that these departments never knew they had to be part of the comp plan before, and we're shifting into that cycle so that as we do those elements, as we do this visioning, that capital plan is tagging along in the sidecar. It's right there to determine. It's one thing to have a vision, but can we run sewer uphill? Is it too expensive? Do we have to do something else? It'll happen.
Or the water system, do these different water systems have the capacity for growth in a certain area?
That's true. And one of the things you'll see in the handout is a update of the coordinated water system plan that we're going through. Again, another parallel process to determine that part of the infrastructure, because we've learned many of these smaller districts may have water rights in some cases, but they don't necessarily have adequate supply to bring wet water to deliver. Yes, we have to figure all that out into that scenario. So next slide.
Thank you.
No more detailed timeline of where we are. The idea of here seeing somewhere in May, we expect to bring the public participation program to you for your consideration and adoption. In July, we expect to have the land capacity analysis buttoned up, and then use the rest of the year for those other 2 pieces. And of course, we left things open in 25, and there's kind of our final date finish line. Your last meeting in June of 2026 is when we would hope that this will be ready for action. And that is all I have. Thank you.
That was a lot. So, thank you. Does anyone have any
We're obviously open to any questions now and in the future. Contact us through me directly if you could. And our guys have been listening to us the whole time up there. They're really doing a fabulous job of putting together the details going into these handouts for all of our key elements. So we appreciate the fact that you made that possible last year with funding that team.
That's great. I think, not a question that I'm gonna have now, but that we can talk about later. It's just kind of how the steering committee of elected officials fits into all of this as well. So,
In one case, one way it's really easy to explain. The interlocal agreement created years and years ago, it was out of countywide planning policies, created a steering committee of elected officials to act on things that are happening on the edge, notably the urban growth area boundaries, and make those distributions. They make a recommendation based on, as you know, everybody, all the elected sitting around that table using their planning staffs to do that. But then they make that recommendation back to you. Steering committee is a creature of the county board. So they make recommendations, but the ultimate assignment, and it's why we started out with GMA recognizes the county as the regional government. Steering committee is essentially a subcommittee that you look to for guidance to provide that guidance based on all of the communities participating in one place. So it has been productive so far. The steering committee has done really, I think, solid work for these last couple of years and sticking into topic. But I guess that's the simple structural part, is that's how they were created and they're responsible to answer to you.
thank you. And then for the record, I do want to recognize that
Oh,
Commissioner Norton joined us about an hour ago, around 11.
Yes, I just wanted
On
to,
your chest.
I just wanted to say this is baby JoJo. Her name's Jovita. She's named after Mara's great aunt, who was an immigrant to the US, and she's doing well. She's been a little sleepy throughout the presentation, Scott, but that's not a reflection on the quality of the presentation.
It's only exciting to us insiders.
I love it. Oh, she's adorable.
I'm gonna kind of keep my video off just so you all don't have to witness my diaper changing technique. So
Very good. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, so we do have one miscellaneous that we do have posted that you're gonna talk about the letter to the city of Spokane. I think it went out last week. Patrick.
Yes, all right. Still.
So everyone was supposed to have their comments in a week ago Friday. So that was how I announced it before. I know comments have been put together. Is there any other changes? Do you have your own letter that you want to send?
Well, I might, it's a little different approach, than what we've got so far, but, maybe a little bit more forceful. As I indicated when we teed up this conversation, I thought the letter from the mayor was insulting, and very disingenuous to all of the work that we've done on a collaborative basis with the city ever since the creation of the blueprint for reform and stabilization facility and co-deployment and on and on and on. And yet, none of that was recognized, and it was like, well, you guys just don't know what you're doing, and here, let us show you how. So I just took a little bit different approach. Don't anticipate that you're going to embrace it. But if you wanted to incorporate different elements of this into the letter that comes from the board, that would be great. If not, that's fine. I'll probably send my own letter, just to lay a foundation from my standpoint in terms of a ongoing relationship. But it's of all the ways that letter could have been drafted to say, hey, we've worked collaboratively for the last several years to and make improvements to the criminal justice system, and I'd like to continue in that effort and work with you to find out how do we pass a ballot measure when we go back out. And it wasn't any of that kind of cooperative kind of an outreach. It was more like, you guys just don't know what you're doing, and here, let me tell you how we're gonna do this. And I just found the letter to be offensive, so that's kind of where I'll leave it at and just go from there.
Can I ask, what's the difference in the coloring? There's
Yes.
red
so-
line, blue line, and purple.
Mhm. So the blue are from Commissioner Waldriff, the
Did
purple,
you sign those like?
yeah, I think the red is Mary and, excuse me, Commissioner
And Jeff.
CUNY and Jeff, and the purple is kind of some consensus, but I can get you a clean copy. The main highlights were, instead of saying, adding, or instead of saying funding the 13th Superior Court judge, saying funding the addition of, instead of saying fruitful, saying productive, instead of saying firmly understand, just say understand, et cetera, et cetera. Changing the date range, for when collaboration should take place. Taking out the word concrete. Emphasizing community engagement. Those were some of the highlights.
And just to be clear, the initial letter before the markups were a product of Pat and my working together just to create a starting point for the commissioners. It was meant to kind of, good tone stuff. So I just want to know, I just want you to know who this came from. And then I know it's been circulating around each of the commissioners and had some hands on it.
I know Director Sparber had just pointed out that Measure 1 was about a lot more than a jail. There were other programs and things contemplated, quite a list of programs that were proposed, or at least were suggested. So that was the only other additional feedback I've received since the letter's been circulated.
So obviously, we're not gonna have time to go through your letter. at
Oh,
this
sure,
point.
no, that's fine. I didn't anticipate it.
No, there could be some valid points in there, that I think we need to then take a little bit more time to look through, so we will not be making this decision today.
I thought your edits were good. My only question is, what do we? What is the meaning of detailed plans? You're expecting the city to come with detailed plans for what?
They kept, that was just one of the things that everyone said they wanted was detailed plans, and the city didn't have a detailed plan. So that's why they didn't support Measure 1 for how they were gonna spend their dollars. And so I think that was part of what we were responding to was, tell us what your detailed.
I didn't think we had detailed plans either. So I just think it's a little disingenuous to say, come with your detailed plans when we had a long list of programs we could invest in. But it wasn't prioritized. Maybe the word priority or something like that, prioritized plans.
So you wanted detailed from us, but you don't want detailed from them? I would think you would
Well, I
trust your
I
own.
think the letter was, we'd
Your own
like to
entity
talk
for it.
about developing another measure with you, which is I think we want to work with the city on a new measure that would help fund criminal justice. So I think that the tone of the letter that I got was, we'd like to sit down and meet with you and talk about a future measure and the stakeholder input we could all get from the community about how do we pass a future successful measure. But anyway, the tone could be read differently, I suppose. But
Yeah, I totally read it differently than that. And I mean, whoever wrote the letter, and I don't want to presume that it was the mayor, but whoever wrote the letter, either one, didn't know all the things that we've done together to get to this point, or chose to ignore all the things we did together to make a statement. Either one of them was not the kind of letter that I would have sent out to somebody saying, okay, hey, you know, we didn't get it, we weren't successful. Let's get together and find out what are the things we learned and how do we move forward? This was very much about, well, it criticized our data, it criticized our consultants, it criticized our designer. I mean, you know, the only thing it didn't criticize was the day of the week. And so, you know, well, okay, fine, you don't like our designer, you don't like the data and everything. What are you gonna propose? They proposed absolutely nothing. They had from December of 22 until 23, and they did absolutely nothing to say how they were gonna spend that money. So I just find it incredibly disingenuous especially for the council, but for the mayor as well. That, you know, hey, you know, we're giving you all this money. And to go through all of this and not recognize the $50 million underwater, really, that measure would have cut half your budget shortfall. If you'd have been in support of it. Well, no, okay, fine, you figure out how you're gonna come up with the other $50 million. But it's not gonna be through measure one. I mean, there were just so many things of all the partnership relationship we had with the city to get to that point and then to have all of it discarded was just, I just thought very. I'll get that.
Well, I thought the addition of the things that we have been doing, like the 13th judge is a great addition. The letters for the mayor, correct? Not the council.
Yes, because the mayor was the one.
And
who
it is a
said
new
it.
mayor since last year.
Yes. So, yeah, so I mean, I'd like to see what you have as past things we've collaborated on together to see how we can incorporate that.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I was just gonna add, there's been some conversation, I don't know if this has been in reporting or just in the community, maybe on social media, that the city may intend to bring forward a public safety levy. You know, we have Spokane Valley talking about adding to the police force and considering things. So when we say detailed plans, I think the intent of that is, what other things does the city have going on? That, you know, we're talking earlier about another ballot measure with the APA, you know, where does this rank in your list of priorities of all the things you have going on, to the question of using the word priority? But also, what are the needs does the city see from a municipal level for jail beds, for staffing, for enforcement of some of these, like open public drug use, for instance? Do they want to have a certain amount set aside for misdemeanors? Or, I mean, I think part of that is contemplating, you know, there was a transition team that several served on. There were conversations that were happening there about what was needed from a city perspective. And they may not have a detailed plan yet, but I think asking them to come up with one, they have their own data on what their needs are, what they're seeing with, you know, through their municipal courts and the city prosecutor, city attorney's office. So just asking for that information to help inform a conversation when you all go to sit down, I think could be helpful.
No, you're good. Commissioner Jordan. Oh, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, I'd appreciate a chance to take a look at what Commissioner French wrote. I like the idea of putting some reminders in there, past collaborations that we could build on, things like that. So I'm very open to that. Happy to see what the latest version looks like after it makes another round. My biggest reaction to the first draft was just the idea. I read it to read that we're not going to meet with you until we are satisfied that you give us X, Y, and Z information. And I think all these topics, all of this feedback should be discussed at a meeting. So the mayor's asked us to meet. I think the answer should be yes. I think that's what the letter should say. I think it's very appropriate to request and to say, here's what we want to know from you. Let's discuss at the meeting. But my concern is really, you know, warring letters resulting in months and months and months of delay, when I really think we should be getting to the table without delay. So that's my general feedback on what I've seen so far.
Thank you. Okay, so everyone can take a look. I guess. Yes.
I think there does need to be some meetings where there's council of governments, and it's not just City of Spokane, they're a big user of the system as well, but City of Spokane Valley is. And there needs to be some good understanding and recognition that if any of the jurisdictions make a decision on their own to go after a public safety tax just for their community, it takes away from the county's capacity to then do what the commissioners want to do. And in that, there needs to be some really good acknowledgement that says, listen, if you take 1% or 2% and it's 85%, and there is a need for jail usage by your citizens, you either need to be ready to park some of that stuff aside to invest in it, or if you're not, then are you acknowledging that you are no longer going to be a contract jurisdiction? You're going to take your misdemeanors and do them somewhere else. I think it's just a reality of the conversation that has to be had. That may be more than we want to get into a letter, but it needs to be a conversation. We just have to have some realistic discussions with all the jurisdictions.
I mean, we're late on this letter anyway, so at this point, like everybody take a look at it and let's talk about it tomorrow, maybe. Tomorrow, we've got a busy morning, I think.
Yeah. So
And then we've got three executive sessions that we've got to get through. So tomorrow, so if we don't get through them in the morning, that'll be added to the afternoon, so just plan accordingly on schedules. So, yes, Commissioner Coach.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on your statement about, we're late on the letter. I sent letters to the mayor back in January and February and still don't have a response. So we're doing fine.
Okay. Very good.
I do have an additional real quick miscellaneous item, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Our current operator for our short line rail out on the West Plains is Jaguar. And we contract with them to operate under the Geiger Spur. The state contracts with them to work on the PCC rail line. And so the state has now told Jaguar, well, they told Jaguar last year, if you invest over $1 million into the PCC, we'll extend your operating contract for 20 years. And they did. In fact, they were about $1.5 million. And with the new business that we just signed up, the 80 acres out at the airport, there'll be another $750,000 in. So the Jaguar has asked if we would harmonize our agreement with the state for operating. So they're operating, we only want one operator on that short line and stuff. And so I'd just like to suggest that we harmonize the contract that we have with Jaguar as a short line operator to match what the state has done. So that we're not dealing with two operators on a short line, just not an efficient way of running a short line.
I guess.
You're wondering, what the heck is he talking about?
Yes.
So,
We need a little more information than this.
okay, let me do an abbreviated version of it. For the Geiger Spur, we have a contract with Jaguar Rail.
And I'll double check too, that you'll be going through legal to make sure this all works legal.
It's the first I've heard of it.
Well, yeah, I'm telling you now, what the heck? Pay attention. So the and so when we hired Jaguar to be the short line operator, we did that in partnership with the state. Because the PCC rail line, that's the Palouse Coulee City rail line, runs from Moses Lake clear down to Whitman County. And it's a short line operation. And then we have a spur off of that, which is a Geiger Spur that we have contracted with the same short line operator to handle rail transport in that. Jaguar is the one that we've contracted with. Yeah, so Jaguar had, I think it was a 7 or 10 year contract to be the short line operator on the PCC rail and our Geiger Spur rail. the state came in and said, well, if you invest money into the PCC rail line, we'll extend your contract to 20 years instead of 7 years. And so they have, and so the state is now extending their contract for 7 years. They're going to be investing another $750,000 in our Geiger Spur as a spur to get off to the Sapporo manufacturing facility. So they asked, would you harmonize the two contracts so that we only have one short line operator that's running the PCC and the Geiger Spur? Makes perfect sense. Talked to Larry Crowder about, does he have any problem with that as far as the airport's concerned? No. So it's just a simple harmonization of the contract so that the two of them align and we don't end up with two rail operators. And we would pay the penalty because if we didn't go to Jaguar, we're hiring a short line operator just to run the Geiger Spur. No one's gonna do that. It's too short a line, too much investment, makes perfect sense. So that's just putting it on the radar. Now, maybe somebody in legal can get a clue and do it.
Who do I talk to?
Doug Story with Jaguar or me.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anything else? Like we're way over. Okay. We'll see everybody back tomorrow at 12:30. Oh, Chris, did you have something else?
I just want to say thanks to everybody for all of your well wishes with the baby. Really appreciate that. And if I mangle any of my words in the next few weeks, the sleep deprivation is a work in progress.
Yes, we all understand those days. So, yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much. And we will see everybody back.